Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Margaret Flynn, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm a park ranger, and I need to tell you what happened to me in the summer of 1967. I've kept this secret for 2 years now, but it's eating me alive from the inside out. I was 33 when they transferred me to Whistler's Ridge. The men at the main station didn't want a woman ranger around, so they sent me to the most remote post they could find, a tiny cabin at 5,200 feet, 35 miles from the nearest town. They thought I'd quit within a month. Instead, I learned to love the silence up there, the way the morning fog rolled through the valleys like a slow river, the smell of pine sap warming in the afternoon sun. The cabin was basic. One room with a wood stove, a cot, a desk, and a radio that only worked half the time because of the mountains. I didn't mind. After growing up with 5 brothers and working in a ranger station full of men who thought I was there to make coffee, the loneliness felt like freedom. I'd been there 2 weeks when I first heard about the whistling. Old Charlie Morton ran the general store in the valley below. He brought supplies up once a week in his beat-up truck, and he always had stories. Most of them I figured were nonsense meant to scare the new ranger. But when he mentioned the whistling, something in his face changed. "You hear any strange sounds up here?" he asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Like what?" "Music, whistling, beautiful, folks say. Like someone playing a perfect tune." I shook my head. "Just birds and wind." "Good." He set down the box of canned goods harder than necessary. "You hear it, Maggie. You come straight down the mountain. Don't try to find where it's coming from. Don't follow it." "Charlie, what are you talking about?" But he was already climbing back in his truck. "Just remember what I said." I laughed it off. Mountain superstition, I figured. People who lived in isolated places always had their ghost stories and legends. 3 days later, they found Jennifer Walsh. She was a college student from Virginia, 21 years old, hiking alone. A search party discovered her walking in circles near Laurel Creek, 5 miles from where she'd pitched her tent. She was covered in dirt and blood, her feet torn to shreds like she'd been walking for days without stopping. Her fingernails were broken and bloody, ripped down to the quick. But here's the strange part. She'd only been missing for 3 days, and the doctors said she'd walked over 50 miles in that time, in circles, never stopping to sleep or eat or drink. I drove down to the hospital to check on her. They had her in a private room, sedated, but I could hear her through the door. She was humming something, the same 6 notes, over and over. The nurse said she'd been doing it since they found her. "Can I talk to her?" I asked. The nurse shook her head. "Doctor's orders. She gets violent if anyone interrupts the humming. Took 3 orderlies to hold her down this morning when someone tried to make her stop." I pressed my ear to the door. The melody was simple but somehow wrong, like hearing a lullaby played backward. It made my skin crawl. "Did she say what happened?" "She doesn't remember anything. Last thing she recalls is setting up her tent on Tuesday evening. She has no memory of the 3 days after that." I went back to my cabin that night with a strange feeling in my stomach. The mountains felt different somehow, heavier, like they were watching. 2 weeks passed quietly. I did my patrols, checked on campers, marked trails, normal ranger work. I almost forgot about Jennifer Walsh and her humming. Then Thomas Green disappeared. Thomas was 68, a retired teacher who came to the Smokies every summer to watch birds. He'd been coming for 20 years. Knew the trails better than most rangers. He wasn't the type to get lost. The search party found his binoculars hanging from a tree branch, 40 feet up. There was no way to reach that branch without climbing equipment. Thomas had arthritis in both knees. He could barely manage the hiking trails, let alone climb a tree like that. I stood beneath that tree for an hour, staring up at those binoculars swaying in the breeze. The bark showed no scratch marks, no signs of climbing, no broken branches below. Nothing. "Maybe a bear knocked them up there somehow," one of the other rangers suggested. "A bear," I repeated flatly. "You got a better explanation?" I didn't, but I also didn't believe a bear had anything to do with it. That night, I heard it for the first time. I was sitting on my cabin porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The birds had gone quiet, which was unusual. Even the insects seemed to have stopped their noise. Then I heard the whistling. It started soft and far away, like someone practicing a tune in the distance, but it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Pure and clear and perfect. Each note felt like it was speaking directly to me, calling my name without using words. I stood up without meaning to. My coffee cup fell from my hand and shattered on the porch, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was finding the source of that sound. I needed to find it more than I'd ever needed anything in my life. My feet started moving, down the porch steps, across the clearing, toward the tree line. Some small part of my brain was screaming, but I couldn't hear it over the whistling. The melody wrapped around my thoughts like warm honey, drowning out everything else. I was 10 feet from the trees when I stepped on a broken branch. The sharp pain in my foot wasn't enough. I kept walking. The whistling grew louder, sweeter. Then I bit my own hand. Hard. Hard enough to taste blood. The pain cut through the fog in my head like a knife. I stumbled backward, gasping, and the whistling stopped. Padid. The forest was silent again. Normal silent, with crickets and rustling leaves. I stood there shaking, blood dripping from the bite mark on my hand, and understood what had happened to Jennifer Walsh, what had probably happened to Thomas Green, too. Something in these mountains was hunting. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk with every light in the cabin burning and went through old incident reports. The ranger station kept records going back to the 1880s. Most of it was boring stuff, weather reports, wildlife counts, visitor logs. But scattered through the decades, I found something else. A pattern. 1889. 3 hikers disappeared near Whistler's Ridge. Never found. 1903. A hunting party of 4 men. Only one came back, and he died in an asylum 6 months later. 1921. 2 children wandered off during a church picnic. Found 5 days later, dehydrated and unable to speak. Both died within a year. 1934. A couple on their honeymoon. The wife was found. The husband wasn't. The list went on. 23 people over 80 years. Most of the reports mentioned the same thing. The victims had heard beautiful music in the woods before they vanished. At the bottom of a dusty file box, I found a leather journal. The cover was cracked and stained, the pages yellow with age. The name inside read, Augustus Morrow, Park Ranger, 1887 to 1889. I opened it carefully and started reading. Augustus wrote in small, neat handwriting about his daily patrols and observations. Normal ranger stuff for the first 30 pages. Then the entries changed. June 14th, 1889. Heard the most remarkable whistling today during my rounds. Unlike any bird I've encountered. Must investigate the source. June 18th, 1889. The whistling continues. I find myself drawn to it. Have neglected some duties to search for the source. Must maintain discipline. June 23rd, 1889. Cannot stop thinking about. I'm the melody. It calls to me in dreams. Martha, his wife, says I am not myself. She does not understand the importance of finding it. July 2nd, 1889. Saw something in the trees today. Tall, wrong shape. It watched me. When I approached, it moved deeper into the forest. The whistling grew louder. The entries became harder to read after that. The handwriting got messy. Letters overlapping, words trailing off mid-sentence. July 15th, 1889. Martha has left. Took the children. Says I am ill. But I am closer than ever to understanding. The piper, the locals call it. They are afraid, but I am not. It wants to show me something wonderful. The final entry was barely readable, written in shaky letters that crawled across the page. July 20th, 1889. I hear it calling my name in Mother's voice. I must go to... The sentence ended there. According to the official records, Augustus Morrow was found dead 3 weeks later, 12 miles from his station, sitting upright against a tree with a smile on his face. I closed the journal and looked out my window. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky pink and orange. The mountains looked peaceful in the early light, beautiful even, but I knew better now. I radioed down to the main station and told them I needed to speak with the sheriff. What I'd found was important. This wasn't just bad luck or people getting lost. Something was actively hunting in these mountains, and it had been doing it for almost a century. The sheriff said he'd drive up the next day. In the meantime, he told me to stay at the cabin and avoid any unnecessary patrols. I tried to follow that order, I really did. But at noon, the call came in. A hunting guide named Robert Pike had been reported missing. His client said he'd wandered off during lunch, said he heard something interesting. That was 6 hours ago. I grabbed my pack and headed out. Robert's clients had set up camp near Willow Branch, about 4 miles from my cabin. They were city people, upset and scared. Robert had been their guide for 3 days, and they said he'd been acting strange that morning. Distracted, like he was listening to something they couldn't hear. He just walked into the woods, one of them said. Didn't even take his rifle, just walked away like he was in a trance. I found Robert's trail easily enough. His boot prints led northeast toward the higher ridges. What worried me was how straight they were. No pauses, no hesitation, like he'd known exactly where he was going. I followed the trail for 3 hours. The prints never wavered, never stopped. Robert had walked through thick underbrush, over fallen logs, through a creek. He'd kept going in a perfectly straight line, no matter what was in his way. Then the trail started to curve, slowly at first, then more sharply. I realized what I was seeing, and my stomach dropped. Robert had been walking in a spiral. The footprints circled again and again, each loop wider than the last. I followed them for another 2 miles, and the spiral kept expanding. He must have walked 15 miles, maybe more, all in this strange pattern. Then I found him. Robert Pike was sitting against a tree at the center of his spiral. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His skin had turned gray, and he was smiling. I checked for a pulse, even though I knew I wouldn't find one. His body was still warm. He hadn't been dead long. There were no wounds on him, no signs of violence. He'd just stopped. I radioed it in and waited with the body for the sheriff and the coroner to arrive. It took them 3 hours to hike in, and by the time they did, the sun was getting low. The coroner examined Robert right there in the woods. Exhaustion, he said after a few minutes. Heart gave out. He walked himself to death. In July, I said. It's 70 degrees out here. The coroner shrugged. I'm telling you what killed him. Why he walked that far without stopping, that's your mystery. They carried Robert's body out on a stretcher. I stayed behind, looking at the center of his spiral. There was something wrong about this spot, though I couldn't put my finger on what. The air felt thicker somehow, heavier. That's when I noticed the clearing. About 100 yards northeast, through the trees, I could see an opening in the forest. The late afternoon sun was hitting it at just the right angle, making it glow. I should have left. I should have hiked back to my cabin with the others. Instead, I walked toward the clearing. The trees seemed to lean away from it, their branches twisted back like they were trying to escape. The underbrush stopped 10 feet from the edge, leaving bare ground. The clearing itself was perfectly circular, maybe 100 feet across. The grass was dead, not brown and dry like drought-killed grass, but gray and flat like all the life had been sucked out of it. In the exact center of the circle, there was a pile of objects. I walked closer, my boots crunching on the dead grass. The sound seemed too loud in the unnatural silence. Wallets, jewelry, shoes, watches, glasses, all arranged in a neat pile like offerings at an altar. I knelt down and picked up one of the wallets. The leather crumbled at my touch, falling apart like it was 100 years old. Inside was a driver's license for Thomas Green. My hands started shaking. I picked up another wallet. This one held a student ID for Jennifer Walsh. There were more, so many more. Old leather coin purses, a compass, a locket, a wedding ring. Items from all 23 victims I'd found in the records, plus others I didn't recognize. Everything was corroded, aged beyond reason, like these objects had been here for centuries instead of weeks or years. I stood up slowly, looking around the clearing. The feeling of being watched was so strong it made my skin crawl. Not just watched, measured, judged. Something lived here, something old and patient and hungry. The sun was touching the horizon now, and I knew I needed to leave before dark. But as I turned to go, I heard voices. A woman and a child, laughing somewhat. They're in the forest. "Hello?" I called out. "This area isn't safe. You need to come with me." The laughter continued, getting closer. I saw movement through the trees. A woman in a blue jacket, holding hands with a little girl. "Ma'am, stop!" I ran toward them. "You can't be here." But they weren't stopping. They were walking straight toward the clearing, the same glazed look on their faces that I'd probably had when I heard the whistling. The woman was humming. 6 notes, repeating. The little girl looked at me as they passed. Her eyes were empty, like no one was home behind them. I tried to grab the woman's arm, but she was stronger than she looked. She shook me off without even seeming to notice I was there and kept walking into the clearing. "No, no, no!" I ran after them, but something stopped me at the edge. An invisible wall pressing against me like a physical force. I pushed harder, but I couldn't enter the clearing. The woman and child walked to the center, to the pile of objects. They stopped and stood there, perfectly still, facing the trees on the far side. "Please," I begged, "come back." The little girl turned her head to look at me. When she spoke, her voice was too deep, too old for a child. "The Whistler wants you to come, Ranger Flynn. It's been so lonely." Then they both went silent and still, like statues. I stood at the edge of that clearing until full dark, trying to reach them, trying to break through whatever held me back. Nothing worked. Finally, I ran back to my cabin and radioed for help, but in my heart, I already knew it was too late. The sheriff brought a team at first light, 8 men, including 2 deputies and a search and rescue crew. I led them to the clearing, praying I'd been wrong, that it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But the clearing was real. The dead grass, the pile of objects, everything. The woman and child were gone. We found their campsite 2 miles away. Elizabeth Porter, age 28, and her daughter Amy, age 6. Their tent was still set up, food in the cooler, car keys on the picnic table. They'd just walked away. We searched for 3 days, found nothing except footprints that led in impossible directions, up cliff faces, through thorn bushes so thick we needed machetes to get through, like something had carried them while they were still walking. On the 3rd day, I found Elizabeth. She was 10 miles from the clearing, deep in an area we call the Narrows. Her body was curled at the base of an oak tree, her fingernails embedded in the bark like she'd been trying to climb it or dig through it. But it was her face that made me throw up. Elizabeth looked like she was 90 years old. Her skin was gray and paper-thin, her hair white, her body shriveled. She'd aged 40 years in 3 days. The coroner couldn't explain it. Some kind of rapid cellular breakdown, he said, which meant nothing. Maybe a weird disease. Maybe environmental exposure. That's not a disease, I said. He gave me a long look. Then what is it? I didn't answer because I didn't have words for what I'd seen. Didn't have words for the feeling that something ancient and hungry had touched Elizabeth Porter and drunk her life down to the dregs. We never found Amy. She was still out there, somewhere in those mountains. I went back to my cabin that night and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. Then 3 more. I was halfway to drunk when I heard it again. The whistling. This time, I was ready. I stuffed cotton in my ears and wrapped a bandana over them. Then I grabbed my flashlight and my father's old revolver, the one I'd inherited when he died, the one I'd never had reason to use. The whistling was coming from the north, up toward the ridge. I followed it, keeping my hand on the gun. The trees seemed wrong at night. The branches twisted into shapes that looked almost like people hanging, swaying in the wind. My flashlight beam bounced off eyes, dozens of them reflecting in the dark. But when I pointed the light directly at them, there was nothing there. I climbed for an hour, the whistling getting louder despite the cotton in my ears. It was inside my head now, I realized. The sound wasn't physical. It was something else. Something that bypassed your ears entirely and spoke directly to your brain. The melody was sad and beautiful and promised things. It promised I wouldn't be alone anymore. Promised all the pain would stop. Promised peace. I bit my hand again. The same spot as before. The scab broke and blood welled up, and the pain cleared my head. That's when I saw the trees. People were standing in them. Dozens of people positioned on branches 15 or 20 or 30 feet up. Some were swaying slightly like they were sleeping. Others were perfectly still. I recognized Thomas Green. His body was gray and dried like Elizabeth's, but he was still standing there on a branch, balanced perfectly, eyes open. Next to him was a younger man I didn't recognize. Beyond him, a woman in hiking clothes. Beyond her, more people. Some looked recent. Others were little more than dried husks, their clothes rotted to rags. They were all smiling. I counted 23 people in the trees. No, more. Some were harder to see, hidden in shadow. Maybe 30. Maybe more than that. And they were alive. I could see their chests moving. Slow, shallow breaths. Like they were sleeping or in some kind of trance. That's when I saw Amy. The little girl was on a low branch, maybe 15 feet up. Her eyes were open, but empty. She was humming the 6-note melody, the same one Jennifer Walsh had hummed in the hospital. "Amy," I whispered. "Amy, honey, can you hear me?" She didn't respond, just kept humming. I grabbed a fallen branch and tried to reach her, tried to knock her down where I could catch her, but the branch wouldn't reach high enough. I was ABU, out to start climbing when the fog rolled in. It came from nowhere, thick and white, filling the spaces between the trees in seconds. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came, out in clouds. And then I saw it. The thing that stepped out of the fog was 15 feet tall, maybe more. It moved like a man, but looked like something that had been buried and dug up wrong. Its body was skeletal, covered in skin like tree bark, gray and cracked. Its arms were too long, hanging down past where its knees should have been. But the worst part was its head. It had antlers, massive, twisted antlers that branched out like a dead tree. Except they weren't made of horn or bone. They were made of human bones, fused together in impossible ways. Skulls and femurs and rib cages all tangled together, reaching toward the sky. The creature's face was mostly human, but wrong. The proportions were off, the mouth too wide, the eyes too far apart. And it was smiling. It looked at me, and I felt that gaze like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Then it whistled. The sound hit me like a truck. Every muscle in my body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The only thing in my mind was that I needed to go to it, needed to let it touch me. My feet started walking, 1 step, 2 steps, toward the creature. I tried to scream, but my jaw was locked shut. I tried to reach for my gun, but my arms wouldn't obey. My body belonged to the whistling now. The creature watched me approach, still smiling. 3 steps. 4. I could smell it now. Rot and old earth and something sweet like flowers at a funeral. 5 steps. 6. It reached out one impossibly long arm. And I thought of my father. My father who died when I was 16, worked himself to death in the mines so my brothers could go to school. My father who'd told me I could be anything I wanted, do anything I wanted, if I was just tough enough and mean enough and refused to quit. My father whose last words to me were, "Don't you ever let them make you quit, Maggie girl." I bit through my own too. Nye. The pain was enormous, white hot, and for just a second the whistling's hold weakened. I threw myself sideways, away from the creature's reaching hand. I crashed through branches, felt something in my left arm snap, and hit the ground hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. The whistling stopped. I scrambled to my feet, cradling my broken arm, and ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop. Just ran through the dark forest, branches tearing at my face and clothes. Behind me, I heard something that might have been laughter. I made it back to my cabin as the sun was rising. My arm was definitely broken, swelling up purple and painful. My tongue was bleeding badly enough that I was spitting blood with every breath. But I was alive. I radioed for help, told them I'd had an accident on patrol. The sheriff said he'd send someone up, but it would be a few hours. The roads were bad from a storm the night before. I sat on my porch with my gun across my lap and waited. That's when I heard the voice in my head. Not the whistling. Actual words, clear as day, though no one was speaking aloud. "You are strong," the voice said. "I have not had one resist me in many years." "Get out of my head," I said out loud. "I cannot leave Ranger Flynn. This is my home. Has been for 178 years. "What are you?" "I have been many things. Once I was a man named Silas Whitmore. I came to these mountains to find gold. I found something else instead." Images flooded my mind. A blizzard. Men huddled in a cave. The food running out. The terrible hunger that drove a man to do unspeakable things. Silas Whitmore had eaten his companions. All 4 of them. And when the rescuers finally found him 3 months later, he'd been alive. Impossibly alive. Transformed into something that wasn't human anymore. "They say I became a Wendigo," the voice continued. "A creature of hunger, and to the winter. But that is not quite right. The mountains here changed me into something different, something worse." "The Whistler," I said. "Yes. I hunt not with claws or teeth, but with a song. I call to the lonely parts of the human soul, and they come to me willingly. They want to be consumed, want to join my collection." "Collection," I repeated, thinking of the people in the trees. "They keep me company. I feed on them slowly, drawing out their lives over months, years sometimes. It is less lonely that way." "You're keeping them alive? They're conscious?" "No, they dream. Forever. Beautiful dreams of the things they wanted most in life. It is a mercy, truly." "Let them go," I said. "Release them." "I cannot. I am cursed to feed this way. Cannot die. Cannot stop. Cannot change. This is what I am now." The sun was fully up now. I could see 4 trucks coming up the mountain road, kicking up dust. The sheriff and his men coming to help. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "A deal. I am so very tired of being alone, Ranger Flynn. The hunger never stops, but it is the loneliness that truly drives me mad. Bring me what I need, people who will not be missed, the lonely ones, the isolated ones, and I will release my current collection. You may save the child, the others too. You want me to bring you victims. I want you to help me feed with purpose. Bring me those who deserve this fate, the violent ones, the cruel ones, those who hurt others." I thought about it. God help me, I actually thought about it. "And if I refuse?" The trucks were closer now, maybe 5 minutes away. "Then I will take them," the voice said simply. "Your sheriff, his deputies, the rescue workers coming to help you. All of them will hear my song, and all of them will join my collection. And you will watch, knowing you could have saved them." "You're bluffing." But even as I said it, I heard the whistling start. Faint, but growing louder. The lead truck swerved. I saw the driver's face go slack, his hands falling from the wheel. The truck rolled to a stop, then the next one, then the next. Doors opened. Men climbed out, their movements slow and dreamlike. They started walking away from the trucks, into the forest, toward the sound that only they could hear. "Stop!" I screamed. "Don't do this!" "Make your choice, Ranger Flynn." I watched Sheriff Hartwell, a man I'd known for 3 years, a good man with a wife and 2 sons, walk into the trees without looking back. His deputies followed, 4 men walking to their deaths because I wouldn't make a deal with a monster. I raised my gun and fired into the air. 3 shots. The sound echoed off the mountains, but didn't stop the men. "Choose," the voice demanded. And I did. "Wait," I said. "I'll make a deal, but not that one." "What do you propose?" "I'll be your warden. I'll control who comes into this territory. I'll minimize the victims, but I won't bring them to you. Instead, I'll visit you, talk with you, bring you news of the outside world, keep you company." The whistling stopped. The men in the forest hesitated, swaying like sleepwalkers waking up. "You would do this?" "If you release the ones you have, including Amy. And if you only take people who come into your territory on their own. No more hunting. No more whistling to draw them in." "You would give up your solitude to keep a monster company?" "I would do what's necessary to protect people." The silence stretched out for a long moment. Then, "Very well. Come to the clearing at sunset. We will discuss terms." The voice left my head. The men in the forest blinked, looked around in confusion. Sheriff Hartwell stumbled out of the trees, looking pale. "Maggie, what happened?" "I was driving and then gas leak from one of the trucks," I lied. "Made everyone dizzy. You're okay now." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, but he nodded anyway. They set my arm at the hospital and gave me stitches for my tongue. I told them I'd be fallen during a patrol, grabbed a tree branch with my mouth to stop myself from rolling down a slope. Stupid accident. They believed it because they wanted to. At sunset, I hiked back to the clearing. The Whistler was waiting. The deal we made that evening changed everything. Every Sunday, I hiked to the clearing, rain or shine, summer or winter. I bring a thermos of coffee and I sit on a fallen log and I talk. I tell the Whistler about the news, about the war in Vietnam, about the moon landing coming up, about new campers and what they say about the world beyond the mountains. It listens. I don't see it. It stays in the trees just out of sight, but I can feel it there, drinking in every word like water in a desert. In exchange, it released Amy. The little girl woke up 3 miles from her mother's body, with no memory of anything after going to sleep in their tent. We told her she'd gotten lost, that her mother had died looking for her. It was kinder than the truth. The other recent victims came back too. Thomas Green was found sitting at a bus stop 40 miles away, confused but alive. Jennifer Walsh stopped humming and was eventually released from the hospital. The older ones, the ones who'd been in the trees for years, were too far gone. The Whistler kept them because releasing them would have been cruel. They were more dream than person by then. I kept my other promise too. I watched who came into my territory. And when certain people showed up, people with warrants, people known for violence, people who hurt others, I would accidentally direct them toward Whistler's Ridge. 7 people in the first year. All of them men who deserved worse than what they got. I told myself I was helping, told myself I was protecting innocent people, told myself I was doing what had to be done. But late at night I dream about those 7 smiling faces in the trees, and I wonder if my father would be proud or horrified. 2 years later, I'm still here. The other rangers respect me now. I'm the woman who survived the haunted mountain, though they don't say it that way. Train the new recruits, including a young man named Peter, who reminds me of my younger brother. Yesterday, I caught him looking at a map of the Northern Territories. "What's up there?" he asked, pointing to Whistler's Ridge. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Old trails, mostly overgrown, not worth the hike. I heard there's good camping." "No." I grabbed his arm harder than I meant to. "Peter, listen to me. You don't go to Whistler's Ridge. Not alone. Not ever. Understand?" He nodded, scared by the intensity in my voice. That night, I made my weekly hike. The Whistler was waiting, as always. I sat on my log and told it about Peter, about how he reminded me of my brother, about how I'd scared him to keep him safe. When I was done talking, the Whistler spoke in my mind. When will you join my collection forever, my only friend? It wasn't the first time it had asked. It won't be the last. I didn't have an answer. I never do. Instead, I stood up, brushed off my pants, and started the hike back to my cabin. Behind me, the Whistler remained in its clearing, patient and eternal and hungry. Halfway down the trail, I realized I was whistling. 6 notes, repeating. The same melody I'd heard that first night. I stopped myself, but my hands were shaking. I'm 35 now. I've been the warden of Whistler's Ridge for 2 years. I wonder how many more years I have before the mountain claims me too. Before I stop being the warden and become just another part of the collection. I wonder if, when that day comes, I'll be smiling like all the others. I wonder if I'm smiling already and just haven't noticed yet. Every Sunday, I go back to the clearing. Every Sunday, the Whistler asks when I'll stay forever. Every Sunday, I don't answer. But the question gets harder to ignore each time. The mountains are beautiful here. Peaceful. In the early morning when the fog rolls through the valley. Yes, you can almost forget what lives in the high places. Almost forget the price of peace. I'm writing this down because someone should know the truth. Because if I disappear one day, if they find me sitting against a tree with a smile on my face, someone should understand why. There are things in these mountains older than any of us, things that hunger not just for flesh but for companionship, for connection, for the warmth of another soul, even as they consume it. I made a deal to save lives. I became a warden to protect people. But every Sunday when I sit in that clearing and talk to a monster, I wonder if I'm the warden or if I'm just another victim who's forgotten how to leave. The whistling follows me in my dreams now. 6 notes, repeating forever. Sometimes I think I'm already one of the smiling ones. I just haven't climbed into my tree yet. My name is Benjamin Darkwater, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. I started working here during the Great Depression when jobs were hard to find. The Park Service saved me from being poor and hungry, so I gave my whole life to it. I'm 47 now, and I know every trail in Shenandoah National Park like the back of my hand. My friends call me Ben. I'm not tall, maybe 5'10", with gray hair that came too early, and blue eyes that don't miss much. People say I'm quiet, but I think I just listen more than I talk. My wife died 3 years ago from cancer. Our daughter Susan is away at college now. She's all I have left, and I miss her every day. Sometimes the mountains feel lonely, but they're also peaceful. At least, they used to be. It was August 1959, the hottest summer anyone could remember. We hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks. The trees were dry as paper, and the grass crunched under your feet like cornflakes. Every day the temperature hit over 100 degrees. The air was so thick you could almost chew it. I worked the fire towers, watching for smoke and danger. My tower was on Hawksville Mountain, the highest point in the park at 4,051 feet. On clear days, you could see for miles in every direction. The view was beautiful, but that summer all I saw was brown grass and dying trees waiting to catch fire. The tower had a radio operator named Jimmy Wells. He was a nervous kid, maybe 22 years old, fresh out of college. He wore thick glasses and jumped at every sound. Jimmy had been acting strange for a week before it happened. "Mr. Darkwater," he said one morning when I climbed up to check on him, "I've been seeing things that don't make sense." "What kind of things?" I asked, pouring coffee from my thermos. Jimmy's hand shook as he pointed out the window. "The shadows," he whispered. "They move when nothing else is moving. Even when there's no wind, even when everything is perfectly still, the shadows keep moving." I looked where he pointed. All I saw were normal shadows from the trees below. They looked right to me. "Son, you've been up here too long," I said. "The heat can play tricks on your mind. Why don't you take a break? Go down to the creek and splash some cool water on your face." But Jimmy shook his head hard. "No, sir. I can't leave the tower. Something bad will happen if I leave." I stayed with him for an hour, watching the forest below. Everything looked normal to me. Just trees and rocks and the dusty trails where hikers sometimes walked. But Jimmy kept staring and pointing at shadows that seemed perfectly ordinary. That night, I wrote in my logbook, radio operator showing signs of heat stress. Recommend rotation to lower elevation. I should have done more. I should have made him leave right then. The next morning, I found Jimmy sitting in his chair, staring straight ahead. His eyes were wide open, but he didn't respond when I called his name. He just kept saying the same thing over and over. The shadows are alive. The shadows are alive. His coffee cup had fallen to the floor. The coffee was still warm. I tried shaking his shoulder, but Jimmy didn't move. He just kept repeating those 4 words like a broken record. His eyes never blinked. They were filled with such terror that it made my stomach feel cold. I radioed for help, but all I got was static. The radio worked fine yesterday, but now it sounded like it was full of angry bees. That's when I saw them. Below the tower, in the dirt around the base, there were footprints. But these weren't normal footprints. They were huge, 18 inches long and shaped like human feet, but wider and deeper than any person could make. The toes had claw marks at the tips. I've seen bear tracks, deer tracks, even mountain lion tracks. These were different. They were arranged in a perfect circle around the tower, like something had been walking around and around all night. I took out my camera and photographed everything. The footprints, the scared expression on Jimmy's face, the radio that wouldn't work. In 21 years, I'd never seen anything I couldn't explain. But that morning, standing in that circle of impossible tracks, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a little boy. I felt afraid. I got Jimmy down from the tower and drove him to the park hospital. The whole way, he kept whispering about living shadows. The doctors said it was a nervous breakdown from too much heat and isolation. They gave him medicine to help him sleep. But I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. The next day, I went back to the tower with my camera and measuring tape. I wanted to document everything properly. That's what good rangers do. We write down what we see, measure what we find, and try to make sense of things. The footprints were still there, even clearer in the morning light. I measured them carefully, 18 inches long, 7 inches wide, with 5 distinct toe marks. Whatever made them weighed a lot. The prints were pressed deep into the hard-packed dirt. I took more pictures, but when I developed the film that evening, something was wrong. In every photo there were shadows that shouldn't be there. Dark shapes that looked almost like people, standing next to trees or rocks. But when I looked at the actual locations, nothing was there. At first I thought something was wrong with my camera. Maybe the heat had damaged the film. But I'd used that camera for years, and it had never malfunctioned before. I studied the photos with a magnifying glass. The shadow shapes were definitely human-like. 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. But they were completely black, like someone had cut people-shaped holes in the pictures. The strangest part was that some of the shadows seemed to be moving between photos. In one picture, a shadow stood by the oak tree. In the next picture, taken just seconds, later the same shadow was by the pine tree 20 feet away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jimmy's words. The shadows are alive. The next morning, I decided to spend a full day watching the area around the tower. I brought binoculars, a notepad, and plenty of water. If something strange was happening, I was going to see it for myself. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Birds chirped in the trees. Squirrels ran along the branches. A deer came to drink from the small stream below. But around noon, when the sun was highest and the shadows were darkest, things changed. First, all the animals left. The birds stopped singing and flew away. The squirrels disappeared into their holes. Even the insects went quiet. The forest became silent in a way that felt wrong. Then the temperature dropped. In the space of 2 minutes, it went from 95 degrees to maybe 75. I could see my breath in the air. And then I saw it. A shadow moved away from the tree that was casting it. I blinked hard and looked again. The tree stood perfectly still. There was no wind at all, but its shadow was sliding across the ground like spilled ink. It moved slowly but steadily toward another tree about 10 feet away. When it reached the second tree, something impossible happened. The moving shadow joined with the second tree's shadow, making it twice as large and twice as dark. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Now both trees had normal shadows, exactly where they should be. But I knew what I had seen. My hands were shaking as I wrote in my notepad, 12:15 p.m. Shadow separation observed. Temperature dropped 20 degrees, no wind, all wildlife fled area. I stayed until sunset, but nothing else happened. As soon as the sun got low and the shadows grew long and pale, the temperature returned to normal. Birds came back. The forest felt alive again. Driving home, I tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe it was the heat playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe I was getting sick. Maybe I needed glasses. But deep down, I knew I had seen something real, something that shouldn't exist. That night, I called the park headquarters and requested a maintenance worker to check the tower equipment. His name was Pete Morrison, a good man who'd worked here almost as long as me. Pete was practical and smart. If anyone could find a normal explanation, it would be him. "I'll head up there tomorrow morning," Pete said. "Probably just heat damage to some of the wiring. This drought has been hard on all our equipment." "Thanks, Pete. And listen, be careful up there. Something feels off about that place right now." Pete laughed. "Ben, you sound like my grandmother talking about haunted houses." "Don't worry. I've been fixing park equipment since before you started here. I can handle whatever's wrong." I wanted to tell him about the shadows, but I knew how it would sound. Crazy old rangers seeing things that aren't there. So I just said, "Radio me every hour so I know you're okay." "Will do, boss." But Pete never made his first radio check. I found Pete's truck parked at the base of Hawksville Mountain the next morning. The doors were open, and his toolkit was scattered on the ground like he'd dropped everything and run. I called his name as I climbed the trail to the tower. No answer. The forest was quiet again. That same wrong, empty quiet from the day before. Pete was sitting on the ground next to the tower, leaning against a pine tree. At first I thought he was just resting. Then I got closer. Pete Morrison had been a strong man of 55 with dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes. The person sitting against the tree looked like Pete's grandfather. His hair was completely white, his face was covered with deep wrinkles, and his hands looked like old leather. But the worst part was his eyes. They were open, staring at nothing, and filled with absolute terror. Just like Jimmy's eyes had been. Pete was still breathing, but barely. His chest moved up and down in tiny, weak motions. When I touched his shoulder, his skin felt cold and thin, like paper. "Pete," I whispered. "What happened to you?" His lips moved slightly. I leaned down to hear. "Shadow took everything," he gasped. Then his eyes closed, and Pete Morrison died. I sat there for a long time, trying to understand what I was seeing. Pete had aged 40 years overnight. That's not something heat stroke or stress can do to a person. That's not something natural at all. I was reaching for my radio when I noticed my own shadow on the ground. It was moving. While I sat perfectly still, my shadow was slowly turning its head to look at me. When I moved my hand, my shadow moved its hand a few seconds later like it was copying me. I jumped up and ran toward my truck, but my shadow ran in the opposite direction. I stopped and looked back. There it was. A dark shape, exactly like me, but separate from me, standing 20 feet away. It waved at me. My blood felt like ice water. I drove straight to park headquarters and told my supervisor, Chief Ranger William Hayes, everything that had happened. The shadow movements, Jimmy's breakdown, Pete's impossible aging and death. Chief Hayes was a practical man who'd run this park for 15 years. He listened to my whole story without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair. "Ben," he said carefully, "you've been under a lot of stress since Martha died. And this heat wave has been hard on all of us. Maybe you need some time off." "I'm not having a breakdown," I said. "Something is killing people up there. Pete had a heart attack. The medical examiner already confirmed it." "What about his appearance? He looked like he'd aged decades." Chief Hayes frowned. "The heat can do strange things to a body after death. Dehydration, exposure. Ben, you're a good ranger, but you're not a doctor." I realized he would never believe me. How could he? If someone had told me this story 3 days ago, I would have thought they were crazy too. I want to go back up there, I said. With a full investigation team, whatever's happening, we need to document it properly. Chief Hayes sighed. I'll send you back with 2 other rangers tomorrow morning. But Ben, if you keep talking about moving shadows and aging corpses, I'll have to recommend a psychiatric evaluation. That evening, I drove home to my small cabin and tried to make sense of everything. I spread Pete's tools on my kitchen table, the ones that had been scattered around his truck. His hammer, his screwdrivers, his wire cutters. They all looked normal. But when I turned on the kitchen light, I saw something that made me drop Pete's hammer on the floor. The tools were casting shadows on the table. But the shadows weren't the right shapes. The hammer's shadow looked like a snake. The screwdriver's shadow looked like a knife. The wire cutters cast a shadow that looked like reaching hands. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning, I met Rangers Tom Bradley and Mike Santos at the park entrance. They were both young men, strong and confident. Tom had been a ranger for 5 years, Mike for 3. They thought this was just a routine investigation of some equipment problems. So what exactly are we looking for? Tom asked as we drove toward Hawksville Mountain. Anything unusual, I said. Strange tracks, equipment malfunctions, signs of animal disturbance. Mike laughed. You mean like Bigfoot? I didn't laugh back. Something like that. We reached the tower around 10 in the morning. Everything looked normal in the daylight. The footprints I'd seen were gone, covered by fresh dirt that must have blown in during the night. I don't see anything unusual, Tom said, looking around with binoculars. Wait until noon, I told them. That's when it starts. We spent the morning checking all the equipment. The radio worked perfectly. The weather instruments were all functioning. There was no sign of damage or malfunction. At 11:45, I gathered Tom and Mike near the base of the tower. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, I said, stay together, don't separate, and whatever you do, don't let your shadow touch any of the tree shadows. Ben, Mike said, you're starting to sound a little... That's when the forest went quiet. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 30 seconds. Tom and Mike stopped talking and looked around nervously. What the hell? Tom whispered. Then the shadows began to move. It started slowly. A shadow would shift slightly when nothing else moved. Then another shadow would slide a few inches across the ground. Then another. Within 5 minutes, every shadow in the area was moving independently. They slithered across the ground like living things, gathering around the base of our tower. This isn't possible, Mike said, backing toward me. But it got worse. The shadows began to stand up. They peeled themselves off the ground like sheets of black paper and stood upright. Human-shaped darkness, perfectly flat, but somehow solid. They had no faces, no features, just the outline of people made from pure shadow. There were dozens of them now, surrounding us in a perfect circle. Tom pulled out his radio, but all that came through was static mixed with what sounded like whispering voices. We need to get out of here, he said. But when we looked toward our truck, we saw that our path was blocked. The shadow creatures stood between us and any escape route. One of the shadows stepped forward. It was larger than the others, darker, more solid-looking. When it moved, I could hear its footsteps on the ground. It pointed at me with one long, thin arm. Then it spoke without a mouth, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. Benjamin Darkwater, we have been waiting for you. What do you want? I asked. The shadow creature, trying to keep my voice steady. The thing tilted its head like it was thinking. All around us, the other shadows swayed back and forth like grass in a breeze, but there was no wind. We want what we have always wanted, it said in that voice that came from the air itself. We want to feed. We want to grow strong. We want to return to the world above. Tom and Mike pressed closer to me. I could feel them shaking. You're not from here, I said. Where did you come from? The shadow seemed to smile, though it had no mouth. We come from the place between places, the darkness that exists behind every light. Your people once knew about us. The first people who lived in these mountains, they remembered. They carved warnings in the stones. They told stories to keep their children safe. I thought about the old Indian legends I'd heard over the years. Stories about shadow people who stole life from the living. I'd always thought they were just tales to scare children. The Monacan Indians, I whispered. Yes, they called us shadow stealers. They knew we came when the sun was high and hot, when normal shadows were deep and dark. They knew we fed on the life force of living things, and they knew how to keep us away. How? I asked. The shadow creature laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Light, Benjamin Darkwater. Pure, bright light. But not just any light. It must be firelight. The light that burns. The light that consumes. I looked around desperately. We were surrounded by at least 30 shadow creatures now, and more were appearing every minute. They seemed to be growing out of the normal shadows cast by trees and rocks. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you interest us. You're strong. You have seen much death, much sorrow. Your wife's long dying, your loneliness, your fear of being forgotten. All of that pain makes you flavorful. My heart pounded. You killed Jimmy and Pete. We fed from them, yes. The young one was easy. His mind was already weak with fear. The older one fought longer, but in the end, we drained every year of his life. He died as an old man, though he was young this morning. Mike made a choking sound. This isn't real. This can't be real. One of the smaller shadows drifted toward him. Would you like to see how real we are? No. I stepped between Mike and the shadow. Leave them alone. You want me, take me, but let them go. The large shadow tilted its head again. How noble. But you misunderstand. We don't just want you, Benjamin Darkwater. We want everyone. Every person in your park, every person in your towns, every person in your world. We have been hungry for so very long. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about me or even about Shenandoah National Park. These things wanted to spread. They wanted to turn our world into their feeding ground. How many of you are there? I asked. We are one, but we are many. Kill one of us and another takes its place. We share one mind, one hunger, one purpose, and with each life we take, we grow stronger. I looked at Tom and Mike. They were both pale with terror, but they were still standing, still fighting the fear that wanted to make them run. Running would be useless anyway. The shadows could move faster than we could. There has to be a way to stop you, I said. There is, but you would never do it. Try me. The shadow creature pointed up at the fire tower with one long arm. Fire, Benjamin Darkwater. Bright fire that burns everything around it. Your ancestors knew this. When we came before, they burned entire forests to drive us back to the darkness. I looked up at the wooden fire tower, then at the forest around us. Everything was dry as paper from the drought. One small flame would spread like lightning, burning hundreds of acres. You want me to start a forest fire, I said. We want you to choose. Save your precious forest, and we will feed on every living thing until nothing. G remains but darkness. Or burn it all, drive us away for another 100 years, and live with the knowledge that you destroyed what you loved most. It was an impossible choice. This was my forest. I'd protected it for 21 years. I knew every tree, every stream, every trail. The idea of burning it all made me feel sick. But I also thought about all the people who visited the park. Families with children, young couples, elderly hikers. All of them would die horrible deaths if these things spread. Ben, Tom said quietly, what are you thinking? Before I could answer, my own shadow peeled itself off the ground and stood up. It turned to look at me with the face I saw in the mirror every morning. "Hello, Benjamin," it said in my own voice. "Are you ready to feed us?" Then it reached for me with hands made of darkness. I jumped backward, but Shadow Ben followed. Its touch was cold like winter ice. Where it grabbed my arm, I felt my strength draining away. My vision blurred, and suddenly I felt old and tired. "Fight it, Ben," Mike shouted. "But how do you fight your own shadow?" That's when I remembered the emergency flare gun in the tower. Every fire tower had one, in case rangers needed to signal for help. The flares burned bright white, hot enough to be seen for miles. I broke free from Shadow Ben and ran toward the tower stairs. Behind me I heard Tom and Mike screaming as the other shadows closed in. The flare gun was in a metal box on the tower platform. My hands shook as I loaded it. Below me, shadow creatures were climbing the tower stairs like spilled ink flowing upward. I aimed the flare gun at the largest shadow and pulled the trigger. The bright white light exploded like a tiny sun. The shadow creature shrieked and dissolved into smoke. The other shadows pulled back, hissing like angry cats. But I only had 4 more flares. And there were dozens of shadows. The flares bought me a few minutes, but I knew they wouldn't be enough. The shadows regrouped at the edge of the light, waiting for the flares to burn out. I could hear Tom and Mike Callie crying for help from somewhere below, but I couldn't see them through the smoke. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I took out my cigarette lighter, something Martha had always nagged me to throw away, and held it to the wooden railing of the fire tower. "Please forgive me," I whispered to the forest I'd protected for so long. The dry wood caught fire immediately. Within seconds, flames were climbing up the tower walls. I had maybe 2 minutes before the whole structure collapsed. I fired my remaining flares in different directions, setting small fires in the underbrush. The shadows shrieked and fled from each new source of light, dissolving into smoke as the flames spread. The tower was burning around me now. I climbed down the stairs as fast as I could, but the fire was faster. By the time I reached the ground, the entire tower was a pillar of flame. Tom and Mike were huddled behind a rock, safe but terrified. Their shadows looked normal again, just regular dark shapes on the ground. "Ben," Tom shouted, "the whole forest is going to burn." He was right. Fire was spreading in all directions, jumping from tree to tree. The drought had made everything perfect kindling. In minutes, it would be beyond anyone's control. But the shadow creatures were gone. As the light from the fires grew brighter, they faded away like bad dreams. I could hear them screaming in the smoke, angry voices that grew fainter and fainter until they disappeared completely. We ran to the truck and drove toward the park entrance, calling in the fire on our radio. Fire crews from 3 counties came to help, but there wasn't much they could do. The fire burned for 6 days and destroyed 12,000 acres of forest. The official report said the fire started when lightning hit the tower during a brief storm. There was no mention of shadow creatures or impossible things, just a nature's, all disaster during a dry summer. Chief Hayes called me into his office a week later. "Ben," he said, "I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. The investigation shows the fire started while you were on duty at the tower. There are questions about your mental state, your recent behavior, and your fitness for duty." I nodded. I'd expected this. "I understand. The Park Service will provide a pension and full benefits. You've served faithfully for 21 years. But I can't have rangers who might be unstable, working in positions of responsibility." My daughter Susan called that evening. "Dad," she said, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "I heard about the fire. People are saying you had some kind of breakdown. They're saying you were talking about monsters and shadows." "Susie, Dad, I think you need help, professional help. Maybe you should move closer to me so I can keep an eye on you." But I could hear in her voice that she didn't really want that. She was embarrassed by her crazy father who saw things that weren't there and burned down forests. After she hung up, I sat in my empty cabin and looked at the newspaper reports about the fire. Environmental disaster. Worst fire in park history. Veteran ranger suffers breakdown. They rebuilt the fire tower 2 years later. A modern steel structure with better equipment and safety features. And then the deaths started again. First, it was a construction worker who aged 40 years overnight. Then a maintenance supervisor who was found catatonic, whispering about living shadows. Then a young ranger who disappeared completely, leaving only footprints that circled the new tower. I tried to warn people, but nobody listened. The old ranger who burned down the forest and talked about shadow monsters. They thought I was crazy. But I know the truth. The shadows came back when the new tower cast new shade. They're patient things, willing to wait years or even decades for the right conditions. I'm 73 now, living on my Park Service pension in a small town 50 miles from Shenandoah, E. Very summer, when the drought comes and the shadows grow dark, I read the newspaper reports of strange deaths and unexplained disappearances in the park, and I know they're feeding again. Sometimes late at night, I sit on my porch and look toward the mountains. I can see a glow on the horizon where the park lights are, and I wonder if anyone else understands what's really happening up there. I've written letters to the Park Service, warning them about the pattern. I've tried to tell them about the old Monacan warnings carved in stone. I've begged them to research the connection between the shadow legends and the recent deaths. But my letters get filed away by people who think I'm a disturbed old man who never recovered from losing his wife and his job. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe the heat and the stress and the loneliness made me see things that weren't there. But sometimes, on very bright sunny days, I look at my own shadow on the ground, and I watch it very carefully to make sure it's not moving when I'm standing still, because I know that some hungers never die. They just wait in the darkness between the light, patient, and eternal, ready to feed again when the conditions are right. The shadows are always hungry, and they never forget a face. My name is Michelle Cavehart, and I need to tell you what really happened in Mammoth Cave back in March of 1985. The official reports say it was a tragic accident caused by spring flooding. They're lying. I was 31 then, been working as a park ranger for 9 years. People called me the cave lady because I spent more time underground than above. Had my PhD in geology, knew every mapped passage in the Mammoth Cave system like the back of my hand. Some folks thought it was weird how a woman could love crawling through tight spaces in the dark, but caves made sense to me. They followed rules. Water-carved limestone in predictable ways. Sound traveled along known paths. Everything had a scientific explanation. Above ground made me nervous. All that open space, nowhere to hide, sky stretching forever. Give me a narrow tunnel any day over a wide meadow. March 15th started normal enough. Heavy rains had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the Kentucky hills into mud and filling every stream. Underground, we could hear the water moving through passages we'd never seen, rushing toward the deepest parts of the cave system. I was checking equipment in the ranger station when the call came in. Wild Cave Tour. 8 experienced cavers, 18 hours overdue. The Wild Cave program was our most challenging tour. 5 miles underground through passages most people never see. These weren't weekend tourists. Every person on that tour had serious caving experience. "Michelle, we need you to lead the rescue," said Chief Ranger Thompson. "You know those deep passages better than anyone." I grabbed my gear. 3 helmet lights, backup batteries, rope, emergency medical supplies. The whole time, something felt wrong. Not the normal worry you get with overdue cavers. Something else. Like the cave itself was holding its breath. The thing about Mammoth Cave is its history. Native. Americans buried their dead in the deepest chambers for thousands of years. During the Civil War, miners dug saltpeter from the walls to make gunpowder. The cave had seen death before, lots of it. But I was a scientist. I believed in facts, not feelings. My rescue team met at the new entrance. 5 experienced cavers, including Tom Bradley, who'd been spelunking for 20 years. We had radio equipment, though it wouldn't work more than a mile down. The limestone blocked everything. "Weather Service says more rain coming," Tom said, checking his watch. "If the lower passages flood, we'll be cut off." I nodded, trying to ignore the strange feeling in my stomach. "Let's move fast, then." The first mile went smooth. We followed the known route the tour group would have taken, looking for any sign they'd passed through. Our lights cut through the darkness, showing familiar rock formations and underground streams. Everything normal. Too normal. Usually caves have sounds, water dripping, air moving through passages, small animals scurrying in the dark. But as we went deeper, the cave grew quiet. Not peaceful quiet, dead quiet. "Anyone else notice how still it is down here?" asked Sarah, one of our team members. I had noticed. But there could be lots of reasons. The rain might be affecting air pressure. The flooding could be changing normal water flow patterns. Everything had a logical explanation. We reached the underground river where the tour group should have crossed. That's where we found their gear. Backpacks scattered across the rocky beach, water bottles half empty, one helmet cracked clean in half, but no people. "Looks like they made camp here," Tom said, kneeling by a sleeping bag, "but then left everything behind." I picked up the broken helmet, turning it over in my hands. The crack was too clean, too precise, like something had squeezed it until it split. That is when we heard the first scream. It came from somewhere deep in the cave, echoing off walls miles away. Human voice, full of terror and pain. But that was impossible. Sound doesn't carry that far through solid rock. The cave system just doesn't work that way. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. We all heard it. A sound that made your skin crawl and your heart race. A sound that didn't belong in any cave I'd ever explored. I checked my compass, did quick calculations in my head. The scream seemed to come from unmapped passages, areas we'd never fully explored. Areas that, according to our surveys, shouldn't exist. "We need to find them," I said, though every instinct told me to turn around and get out. As we packed up the scattered gear, I found something that made my blood run cold. Claw marks in the soft clay beside the river. 4 parallel gouges, each one deeper than any bear or mountain lion could make. And they were fresh. We followed the claw marks deeper into the cave system, moving through passages I'd mapped years before. But something was different. Formations I remembered being on the left were now on the right. Tunnels seemed wider, or maybe narrower, like the cave itself was changing. "Michelle, are you sure this is the right way?" Tom asked after we'd been walking for an hour. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. My compass spun wildly, couldn't get a steady reading. The air felt thick, harder to breathe. And that dead silence pressed against us like a living thing. The blood trail started near Devil's Kitchen, a chamber named for its red limestone walls. Dark drops leading deeper underground, following a passage I'd never seen before. "This tunnel isn't on any of our maps," said Sarah, shining her light into the opening. She was right. I'd surveyed this area myself, knew every inch. But here was a passage wide enough for 3 people, cutting straight into the hillside. Fresh air moved through it, carrying a smell I couldn't identify. Something old and wrong. The blood drops continued into the darkness. We had no choice but to follow T. He knew tunnels sloped downward at a steep angle, deeper than we'd ever gone before. Our lights showed smooth walls, worn by water over millions of years. But there were other marks too. Long scratches in the stone, like something with claws had been sharpening them. After 20 minutes of climbing down, we reached a chamber the size of a small church. Cathedral-like formations hung from the ceiling, and an underground stream ran along one wall. It would have been beautiful, except for what we found there. Jerry Mullins, one of the missing cavers, hanging upside down from a rock formation 30 feet above our heads. At first I thought he was dead. He hung there perfectly still, arms dangling, wrapped in what looked like thick spider webs. But then I heard him breathing, slow, steady breaths echoing in the chamber. "Jerry," Tom shouted, "can you hear us?" Jerry's eyes opened. He looked down at us, mouth moving, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide with terror, trying to tell us something important. That's when I saw the others. 5 more tour group members, all wrapped in the same thick webbing, all hanging from different formations around the chamber. All alive, all breathing, all trying to scream warnings we couldn't hear. "We need to get them down," Sarah said, already unpacking climbing gear. But I was looking at the walls, studying the chamber more carefully. The scratches weren't random. They formed patterns, almost like writing. And the smell I couldn't identify was getting stronger. It smelled like old blood and wet fur, Tom had his rope ready and was setting anchors to climb up to Jerry when we heard the sound. Not a scream this time. Something else. A clicking noise, like fingernails tapping on stone, but much louder, much bigger. The sound came from above us, somewhere in the darkness beyond our lights. "Everyone stay very still," I whispered. The click-it moved across the ceiling directly over our heads. I could hear air moving, like something large was flying just out of sight. Our lights couldn't reach that high, but I caught glimpses of movement in the shadows. Sarah grabbed my arm, pointing upward. One of our lights had found it. A wing. Leathery and black, easily 15 feet from tip to tip. It folded against the ceiling, and whatever it belonged to settled into the darkness above the hanging victims. That's when Jerry managed to make a sound, a weak, terrified moan that echoed through the chamber. The thing on the ceiling answered with a shriek that nearly burst our eardrums. Not quite animal, not quite human. A sound of pure rage and hunger that made every muscle in my body want to run. But there was nowhere to go. Tom was the first to break. He turned and ran for the tunnel we'd come from, his light bouncing wildly as he fled. The rest of us started backing away slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. The creature dropped from the ceiling. I got my first full look at it in the light of our combined flashlights. 15 feet of nightmare. Body like a massive bat, but with arms and legs that looked almost human. Face that might have been a man's once, but stretched and twisted into something horrible. Eyes that reflected our lights like mirrors, showing an intelligence that was definitely not animal. It landed between us and the tunnel exit, cutting off our escape. Then it spoke. "You should not have come here." The voice was like grinding stone, but the words were perfectly clear. This thing could talk, could think, had been waiting for us. "The others are mine now," it continued, gesturing with one clawed hand toward the hanging victims. "Fresh food for the long winter. But you I will kill quickly." Sarah screamed and ran toward a different passage. The creature moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. One moment it was near the entrance. The next it was on top of her. The sounds she made as it fed will haunt me forever. When it was done, it turned back to the rest of us with sighs, raw blood dripping from its mouth. "Run," it said, almost gently. "Give me sport." We ran. The passages we fled through seemed to twist and change as we ran. Tunnels I knew led to dead ends suddenly opened onto new chambers. Routes that should have taken us back to the surface instead led us deeper underground. The creature was playing with us. We could hear it behind us, sometimes close, sometimes far away. That terrible clicking sound echoing off the walls. Occasionally it would let out that shriek, just to remind us it was there, hunting. After an hour of running, we stopped in a small chamber to catch our breath. 3 of us left now, me, Tom, and Marcus, a young ranger on his first rescue mission. "What was that thing?" Marcus gasped, hands shaking as he tried to change his flashlight batteries. I'd been thinking about that, the cave system, the Native American burial grounds, the stories old-timers told about things that lived in the deep places. "Guardian," I said. "The Cherokee buried their dead in these caves for thousands of years. Maybe they left something behind to protect them." Tom wiped sweat from his face. "Protect them from what?" "From people like us. We had to keep moving. The creature would find us if we stayed still too long. But every passage seemed to lead us in circles, always ending up deeper in the cave system. That's when we found the real burial chamber. It was huge, bigger than any natural formation should be in this part of the cave. The walls were lined with shelves carved into the rock, each one holding human remains. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Some looked ancient, wrapped in rotted cloth and decorated with old beads and pottery. But others were fresh, recent clothes, modern jewelry, people who'd disappeared in these caves over the years. "My God," Tom whispered. "How long has this been going on?" I was studying the newer remains when I recognized something. A Park Service badge on a ranger uniform. The name tag read, Williams. Pete Williams had vanished 3 years ago during a solo survey mission. We'd searched for weeks, never found a trace. Now I knew why. The creature had been feeding for a long time. A sound from the chamber entrance made us turn. The beast stood there, blocking our way out but not attacking, just watching us with those horrible, intelligent eyes. "You understand now," it said. "This is sacred ground. The dead rest here in peace. Your people have no business in the deep places." "We didn't know," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "We were just trying to help." "Your people never just help," it replied. "You map, you study, you bring more people, you disturb the peace of the ancestors." It was right, and I knew it. Every cave we mapped became a tourist attraction. Every natural wonder we studied became a commercial opportunity. We said we were preserving nature, but really we were turning it into entertainment. "The ones hanging above," I said. "The tour group. Let them go. They didn't mean any harm." The creature tilted its head, considering. "They will feed me through the winter. When spring comes, their families will forget. They always do." Marcus made a run for a side passage. The creature was on him before he took 3 steps. This time it didn't feed, just broke his neck with one swipe of its claws and tossed the body aside. "Do not try to run again," it told Tom and me. "There is nowhere to go." It was right about that too. Every passage led back to the burial chamber. The creature had changed the cave somehow, made it into a maze with itself at the center. But I'd been studying the rock formations, the way water had carved the limestone over millions of years, and I had an idea, a terrible, desperate idea. "You've been here a long time," I said to the creature, "since the first Cherokee was laid to rest in the sacred dark. Then you know what happens when the spring floods come." For the first time, the creature looked uncertain. I pointed to the ceiling of the burial chamber, where I could see hairline cracks in the limestone. Ancient water damage, the kind that happened when underground rivers changed course during heavy flooding. "The water table is rising," I continued. "All that rain has been building up in the upper passages. Soon it's going to find a new way down." The creature's eyes followed my pointing finger to the cracks above us. "You're bluffing," it said, but I could hear doubt in its voice. "Am I? You've lived in these caves long enough to know the signs. Feel that air pressure changing. Hear how the water sounds different in the passages. The flood is coming, and when it hits, this whole section is going under." I was betting everything on my knowledge of cave geology. The creature was old, maybe ancient, but it was still just an animal. It might not understand how limestone formations failed under water pressure. Tom caught on to what I was doing. "The burial chamber will flood first," he added. "All this will be underwater in a few hours." The creature looked around at the carved shelves, the remains of its ancestors' sacred dead. For a moment, its terrible face showed something almost human. Worry. "But you can save them," I said quickly. "If you let us help. We know ways to redirect the water flow, strengthen the supports. We can preserve this place." It was a lie, but a good one. The spring flood was real, and this chamber probably would flood. But there was nothing any of us could do to stop it. The creature stared at me for a long moment. Then it smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "Nice try," it said. "But I have lived through many floods. The sacred chamber has protections your science cannot understand." That's when the first drops started falling from the ceiling. The water started as a trickle, drops falling from the hairline cracks in the limestone ceiling. But within minutes it became a steady drip, then a stream, then a pour. The creature looked up with growing alarm as water began cascading into the burial chamber. "This is not possible," it said. But I could hear fear creeping into that grinding stone voice. I'd been wrong about one thing. The flood wasn't coming in a few hours. It was happening now. All that rain over the past 3 days hadn't just raised the water table. It had found a weak point in the limestone above us and was breaking through. Millions of gallons of water were looking for the fastest way down, and they'd found it. The creature spread its massive wings and flew up toward the ceiling, trying to stop the flow with its body. But you can't fight geology with teeth and claws. The limestone cracked wider under the pressure, and more water poured through. "Tom, we need to get out of here now," I shouted over the roar of falling water. But the creature wasn't giving up. It dropped back down and grabbed Tom around the chest with its claws, lifting him toward the shelves carved high in the chamber walls. "If I cannot stop the flood," it shrieked, "then you will drown with the ancestors." I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a loose piece of limestone from the floor and threw it as hard as I could at the largest crack in the ceiling. The rock hit perfectly, wedging into the crack and creating a weak point. The limestone above it gave way with a sound like thunder, and suddenly we had a waterfall instead of a pour. The creature dropped Tom and flew at me, claws extended, mouth open in a scream of pure rage. But the water was rising fast, and its wings were getting wet, making it harder to fly. I dove behind one of the carved shelves as the beast's claws scraped across the stone where my head had been a second before. The water was knee-deep now and rising fast. Ancient bones and pottery floated around us like a nightmare soup. The creature was thrashing in the water, trying to save the sacred remains, but there were too many, and it was happening too fast. That's when I saw my chance. The main entrance to the chamber was now underwater, but there was another opening higher up on the wall, a natural chimney that led toward the surface. If I could reach it before the water got too high, I started swimming toward the wall, using the floating debris as cover. Behind me, the creature was still trying to gather up the scattered remains, its terrible cries echoing off the flooded chamber walls. But as I reached the wall and started climbing toward the chimney, Tom called out from where he was trapped on a high shelf. "Michelle, the tour group, they're still hanging in the other chamber." I'd forgotten about Jerry and the others, wrapped in webs and suspended from the ceiling. If this chamber was flooding, that one would be too. The creature heard Tom's words and turned toward us, eyes blazing with fury and desperation. "You have destroyed everything," it said. "Sacred ground that stood for 1,000 years, ruined by your meddling." It was right, and the guilt hit me like a physical blow. But there was no time for regret. The water was still rising, and we all were going to drown if I didn't act fast. I made a decision that would haunt me forever. Instead of climbing toward safety, I dove back into the flooded chamber and swam toward the creature. "Listen to me," I shouted. "The burial chamber is lost, but you can still save the tour group. They don't have to die for my mistakes." The creature floated in the water, its massive form looking smaller somehow, defeated. "Why would you care about their lives when you have destroyed the sacred dead?" "Because that's what people do," I said. "We make mistakes, terrible mistakes, but then we try to fix them." For a moment, we just stared at each other across the rising water, the ancient guardian and the scientist who'd brought disaster to its sacred ground. Then it nodded. "Follow me," it said. "But when this is done, you leave these caves forever, all of you. Never return to the deep places." The creature led us through a passage I hadn't seen before, one that stayed above the flood level. We could hear water rushing through the lower tunnels as the cave system tried to handle all that new flow. The chamber where the tour group hung was partially flooded, but the formations they were wrapped to rose above the water level. The creature flew up and began cutting them down with its claws, surprisingly gentle as it lowered each person into Tom's waiting arms. Jerry was conscious when we unwrapped him, though weak from hanging upside down for so long. "That thing," he whispered. "It kept us alive, fed us drops of water, shared its food, said we were for the winter, but it didn't want us to suffer." Even as a monster, the creature had shown mercy. We got all 6 surviving tour group members free and started moving toward higher ground. The creature led the way, its knowledge of the cave system keeping us ahead of the flood. But as we climbed through narrow passages toward the surface, I could hear something behind us. A deep groaning sound, like the cave itself was in pain. The limestone was shifting, huge sections of the underground system collapsing as water found new ways through the rock. Everything was changing, whole passages disappearing forever, including the burial chamber and all the sacred remains we'd failed to save. When we finally reached the surface, dawn was breaking over the Kentucky hills. We were muddy, exhausted, and traumatized, but alive. The creature stood at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the morning light. "Remember your promise," it said to me. "Never return to the deep places." Then it turned and walked back into the darkness, and I never saw it again. The official investigation concluded that a flash flood had caused a partial cave-in, trapping the Wild Cave tour group and killing 2 rescue team members, Sarah and Marcus. The bodies were never recovered, swept away by underground currents, according to the E-Port. I told the truth about what happened, at least to my supervisors. They listened politely, then quietly transferred me to a desk job processing paperwork. 6 months later, they forced me into early retirement due to stress-related mental health issues. Tom backed up my story, but he was older, close to retirement anyway. They let him finish out his years in peace, but made sure he never led another underground rescue. The members of the tour group all told the same story I did. They remembered the creature, the hanging chamber, the flood, but their accounts were dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations. Shock and oxygen deprivation playing tricks on their minds. The entrance to the deep sections was permanently sealed after the cave-in. Official reason was geological instability due to changing water tables. The real reason was to make sure nobody ever went back down there. But I kept my promise anyway. I never returned to any cave system, anywhere. The open spaces above ground still made me nervous, but I learned to live with the anxiety. It seemed like fair punishment for what I'd done to that sacred burial ground. For years, I worked as a consulting geologist for mining companies, using my knowledge of underground formations to help them avoid dangerous areas. Good work that kept me busy and didn't require going underground. But I always watched the missing persons reports from Kentucky. Every year, a few people disappear in the cave systems around Mammoth Cave. Usually inexperienced cavers who ignore safety rules or venture into unmapped areas. The official explanations are always the same. Got lost, fell into underground rivers, trapped by cave-ins. I know better. The creature survived the flood, found new deep places to call home, and it's still protecting what remains of the sacred burial grounds, the ones we never found and mapped. Sometimes I wonder if I should try to contact it again, apologize properly for what happened that night, try to make real amends for the destruction I caused. But I gave my word never to return to the deep places, and some promises are too important to break. Instead, I do what I can from up here in the world of open sky and endless horizons. I've written reports, disguised as geological surveys, that recommend against exploring certain cave systems. I've influenced mining permits to keep companies away from areas I suspect might be sacred ground. And I've left coded warnings in scientific journals, hidden messages that other cavers and spelunkers might recognize if they know what to look for. Because the creature was right about one thing. There are places in this world that should be left alone, sacred spaces that don't belong to us, that we have no right to map or study or turn into tourist attractions. The deep places remember everything, and they never forgive. So if you're reading this and thinking about exploring unmapped caves in Kentucky, or anywhere else for that matter, please remember what I learned that terrible night in March of 1985. Some doors should stay closed. Some darkness is meant to hide things, and some screams echoing through limestone passages are warnings that smart people learn to heed. The creature is still down there, somewhere in the deep places we'll never see. Still guarding what remains of the sacred ground. Still punishing those who venture too far into its domain. Still keeping its ancient promise to the dead, just as I'm keeping mine to the living. My name is Michelle Cavehart, and this is the truth about what happened in the Mammoth Cave system in 1985. The government files will tell you it was a tragic accident caused by spring flooding, but now you know better. And if you're smart, you'll stay in the light. My name is Samuel Coleridge, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened in those old mines back in '81. The official report says it was a cave-in. That's a lie. I grew up in these Kentucky hills. My daddy was a coal miner, and his daddy before him. I knew I didn't want to spend my life underground, so I became a ranger instead. Spent most of my career out west, dealing with grizzly bears and mountain lions in places like Yellowstone. When the transfer to Daniel Boone National Forest came up, I jumped at it. Mary, my wife, she's a nurse at the county hospital. Our 3 kids were in high school, and we thought Kentucky would be safer than Montana. Bears and wildcats I could handle. What I found in Harlan County was something else entirely. I was 39 then, a big man at 6'1" with a black beard that Mary was always telling me to trim. I kept a miner's lamp on my belt always, old habits from growing up around the mines. My specialty was cave rescue and geological surveys. I'd been a spelunker since I was 12, knew more about underground spaces than most folks knew about their own backyards. The Harlan County section was my assignment. Abandoned coal country, full of old mine shafts and strip-mined hillsides that looked like giant scars on the earth. The big disaster happened back in '52. 23 miners trapped when the main shaft collapsed. They never found the bodies. November of 1981 was colder than usual. First snow came early, and ice storms made the mountain roads dangerous. It was hunting season, so we had plenty of folks wandering around the forest with rifles. Most knew to stay away from the old mine entrances, but college kids didn't always listen to warnings. That's how it started. 6 students from the University of Kentucky's Spelunking Club decided to explore the abandoned Harlan mine. They had permits, proper gear, and a good reputation. Should have been a routine weekend trip. When they didn't check in Sunday evening, their faculty advisor called us. They know their stuff, he told me over the radio. Been caving together for 2 years. Something's wrong. I assembled a rescue team, 2 paramedics from the county and Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison, who'd grown up near the mines like I had. We headed out at first light Monday morning, driving through freezing rain that made everything look like glass. The old mine entrance sat in a hollow between 2 strip-mined hills, surrounded by rusted equipment that had been sitting there since Eisenhower was president. The students' cars were parked right where they should be. Their gear was laid out neat and organized at the mine entrance. Nothing looked disturbed, but something felt wrong from the moment we got there. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to one of the old mining carts. "What do you make of that?" Fresh bite marks. Human bite marks. Deep ones, like someone had been chewing on the rusted metal edge of the cart. The marks were recent, no rust in the grooves yet. "Maybe one of the students got hurt," suggested Carol, one of the paramedics. "People do strange things when they're in shock." I'd seen plenty of injury scenes. This didn't feel like shock behavior. The bite marks were too deliberate, too deep, like someone had been gnawing on metal for a long time. Old Pete Hensley lived about a mile down the valley. He'd worked these mines before the disaster, one of the lucky ones who'd called in sick that day in '52. We stopped by his place before heading underground. "You boys sure you want to go down there?" he asked, rocking on his porch despite the cold. Things came up from those deep mines after the collapse. Things that should have stayed buried. "What kind of things, Pete?" I asked. "Hungry things," he said, and went inside without another word. The main shaft slanted down at a steep angle, supported by rotting timber that creaked with every step. Our headlamps cut through darkness that seemed thicker than it should be, like the air itself was heavy. The temperature should have dropped as we went deeper, but it was getting warmer. "Equipment check," I called when we'd descended about 200 feet. Carol and her partner Tom tested their medical gear. Jake checked his radio. Nothing but static. My compass was spinning like a top. "Electrical interference from old mining equipment," Tom suggested. But I'd been in dozens of abandoned mines. This felt different. The main tunnel branched into 3 smaller shafts. We found the first sign of the students in the middle passage, a dropped flashlight with fresh batteries that wouldn't turn on. 50 feet further, we found Sarah Chen's jacket hanging from a support beam. No tears, no blood, just hanging there like someone had carefully placed it. "Sarah, can you hear us?" Jake's voice echoed down the tunnel. The echo came back wrong, like it had bounced off things that weren't there when we'd looked. We followed the tunnel deeper. The walls changed from rough-hewn rock to smooth surfaces that reflected our lights in strange ways. Mining equipment that should have been covered in 30 years of dust was clean, some pieces arranged in patterns that made no sense. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from somewhere ahead of us, high-pitched and desperate. Human, definitely human, but with an edge to it that made my skin crawl. We ran toward the sound, our lights bouncing wildly off the tunnel walls. The screaming stopped suddenly, like someone had thrown a switch. We found the mining cart in a wider chamber, one of the old loading areas. It was full of bones, fresh bones, some still with meat on them. And at the top of the pile, wearing a UK Spelunking Club t-shirt, was what was left of a young man who'd probably been alive that morning. Carol threw up tea and started praying in Spanish. Jake drew his gun, though what he planned to shoot at I couldn't say. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Now!" But when we turned around, the tunnel we'd come through was blocked, not caved in. Blocked. Someone had moved a mining cart full of rock and debris into the opening while we'd been focused on what was in the chamber. "That's impossible," Jake whispered. "We would have heard." The lights went out. All of them, at the same time. My headlamp, their headlamps, Carol's big flashlight. Complete darkness, the kind you only find deep underground where no light has ever reached. In that darkness, we heard breathing that wasn't ours. Slow, deliberate, coming from multiple directions. And underneath it, a sound like fingernails scraping against stone. Tom's voice, tight with panic. "I can smell them. Dear God, I can smell them." He was right. The air carried a scent like meat left too long in the sun, mixed with something else. Something that reminded me of the smell that clung to my grandfather's clothes when he came home from the mines. Our lights flickered back on, dim and yellowish. Just enough to see shapes moving at the edges of our vision, pale things that seemed to flow like water between the support beams and mining equipment. "Stay together," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Back to back." But when I turned around, Tom was gone. His medical bag sat on the ground where he'd been standing, its contents scattered like he'd dropped it and run. Except there was nowhere to run to. The chamber had 4 entrances, and we could see all of them. Carol was shaking so hard she could barely hold her flashlight. "Where did he go? Tom? Tom!" Her shouting brought an answer, but not from Tom. Something screamed back at us from deeper in the mine, a sound that started human and became something else entirely. The echo seemed to go and forever, bouncing through tunnels that shouldn't exist. Jake grabbed my arm. "Sam, we need to move. Whatever's down here, it's playing with us." I'd spent years tracking dangerous animals, but this felt different. Animals killed for food or territory. This felt personal, like something that had been waiting specifically for us to arrive. We started moving toward what looked like the most stable tunnel, Carol between Jake and me. Our lights cast wild shadows that seemed to move independently of us. Every few steps, I thought I saw faces in the darkness, pale, stretched faces with too many teeth. 30 feet into the tunnel, we found Tom. He was pinned against the wall by what looked like an old mining support beam, but the beam was positioned wrong, like it had been placed there deliberately. Tom was still breathing, but barely. They were talking," he gasped. "Talking about how long to make it last." That's when I realized we weren't dealing with animals at all. We couldn't move Tom without risking a cave-in, and he was bleeding internally. Carol did what she could with pressure bandages while Jake and I tried to figure out how the support beam had ended up where it was. It was wedged perfectly to pin Tom but not kill him, at least not right away. "This isn't random," I told Jake quietly. "Someone knows these tunnels better than we do." Tom kept mumbling about voices, about things discussing him like he was dinner being prepared. Carol gave him something for the pain, but his eyes stayed wide and frightened even as the drug took hold. "Sam," he whispered, grabbing my arm. "They're not animals. They used to be. They remember being." He passed out before finishing the sentence. We heard them moving around us then, staying just outside our light. Footsteps that sounded almost normal, except they were coming from above us, walking on the tunnel ceiling. The scraping sounds were constant now, like fingernails or claws being dragged across stone and metal. Jake's radio crackled. For a moment, we heard a voice, Pete Hensley's voice, saying, "I told you boys not to go down there. Hungry things." Then static. "How is he reaching us down here?" Jake asked. He wasn't. We were hearing an echo of something Pete had said earlier, somehow recorded and played back by the tunnels themselves. That's when I started to understand how long these things had been down here, how much they'd learned about sound and echo and fear. Carol was checking Tom's pulse when the first one stepped into our light. It had been human once, tall and thin, wearing the remnants of mining clothes that might have been put on 30 years ago. Its skin was the color of old bones, stretched tight over a frame that was all angles and sharp edges. But the worst part was its eyes, still human eyes, intelligent and aware, looking at us with an expression that was almost hungry anticipation. "Hello," it said in a voice like wind through broken glass. "Been a while since we had company." Jake raised his gun. The thing tilted its head, curious. "That won't help much," it continued. "We died in 52. Bullets don't mean much to us anymore." "You're not dead," I said, though my voice shook. "You're just changed," it agreed. "Had to survive down here. Started with the rats, then, well, you know how it goes." More shapes appeared at the edges of our vision. A dozen of them, maybe more, all wearing mining clothes from decades past, all carrying that same impossible mixture of human intelligence and inhuman hunger. "The college boys put up a good fight," the first one said conversationally. "Especially the girl. She lasted almost 2 weeks before we finished with her." Carol made a sound that was half sob, half scream. "Now, we've got a choice to make," the thing continued. "We can do this quick, or we can make it last. We prefer making it last, but we're willing to negotiate." Jake fired 3 shots. The bullets passed right through the creature without slowing it down. It laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Told you," it said. "Been dead 30 years. Takes more than bullets to put us down for good." That's when I remembered something from the mining disaster reports. The official story was that 23 miners had been trapped and died. But Pete Hensley had once told me that 26 miners had been on shift that day. 3 had been found alive after 4 days, but they'd died in the hospital from what the doctors called extreme malnutrition and psychological trauma. What if they hadn't died in the hospital? What if they'd been sent back underground? "You were the survivors," I said, "from the 52 disaster." The creature's smile showed teeth that had been filed to points. "Smart man. Yes, we survived. For a while. Until the hunger got too much and we did what we had to do to stay alive. And then you couldn't leave," I realized. "Because of what you'd become." "Oh, we could leave," it said. "We chose to stay. Up there, people would hunt us. Down here, people come to us." The others were moving closer, forming a circle around us. I could see tool marks on the tunnel walls where they'd modified the passages, creating a maze designed to trap visitors and channel them into killing zones. "Tom's hurt bad," Carol said suddenly. "He needs a hospital." "Tom's fine where he is," the creature replied. "We'll take good care of him. He'll last weeks if we're careful." That's when I understood what we were really dealing with. These weren't monsters who killed for food. They were something worse. Intelligent predators who had turned torture and cannibalism into an art form, with 30 years to perfect their methods. Jake grabbed my arm. "There," he whispered, pointing to a gap between 2 creatures. "Emergency shaft. I can see the markers." Emergency ventilation shafts were required in all deep mines, usually unmarked to prevent accidents. But someone who'd grown up around mining would know what to look for. The subtle differences in airflow, the way sound carried. "When I say, 'Run,'" I whispered back. The creature was still talking, describing in detail what it planned to do with each of us. I let it talk while I studied the shaft opening. It was small, maybe 3 feet across, but it angled upward. If it connected to the surface... "Run!" We broke for the shaft opening. The creatures moved to intercept us, but they'd grown overconfident after 30 years of easy hunting. We made it to the opening just as clawed hands reached for us. Jake went first, then Carol. I was pushing Tom's unconscious form ahead of me when something grabbed my ankle. I looked back and saw the first creature, its filed teeth inches from my leg. "You can't leave," it hissed. "Nobody leaves." I kicked it in the face and hauled myself into the shaft, just as the tunnel behind us filled with inhuman screaming. The emergency shaft was barely wide enough for our shoulders, angling upward at 45 degrees through solid rock. We had to drag Tom between us, and every few feet we could hear the creatures below us, their voices echoing up through the darkness. "They're following," Carol gasped. She was bleeding from scratches on her arms where clawed fingers had caught her. The shaft was old, carved out in the 1940s as an escape route that was never supposed to be used. But the walls showed fresh tool marks, recent modifications that widened sections and removed obstacles. The creatures had been preparing this route, turning even the emergency exit into part of their trap. "It's a funnel," I realized. "They want us to go this way." Jake checked his ammunition. 2 bullets left. "So what do we do?" I studied the shaft ahead of us. About 50 feet up, it branched into 2 passages. One continued toward what should be the surface. The other dropped back down into the mine complex. "They expect us to take the up passage," I said. "It's probably blocked or leads to another D." I'd end. "So we go down?" Carol asked. "We go up, but not the way they expect." I'd noticed something they might have missed, a narrow gap in the rock wall that looked natural, not carved. Air was moving through it, and it smelled like snow and pine trees. Surface air. The gap was tight, barely 18 inches wide. We'd have to leave Tom behind. "I'm not leaving him," Carol said firmly. "They're not going to kill him quickly," Jake pointed out. "Not if they've been planning this for 30 years. We get out, get help, come back with a full rescue team." It was the logical choice, but logic felt like betrayal when Tom had been our partner and friend. That's when Tom opened his eyes. "Go," he whispered. They're coming up behind us. I can hear them." He was right. Scraping sounds echoed up from below, getting closer. Multiple creatures moving through the shaft with inhuman speed. "There's something else," Tom said, his voice getting weaker. "When they had me pinned, I heard them talking about others. Surface people they've taken over the years. Hunters, hikers. They keep them alive down there. Some for months. The creatures weren't just feeding on people. They were building a collection." "The gap," I said. "Now." Jake went first, then Carol. The space was so narrow we had to exhale to squeeze through, but it opened into a natural cave system that connected to the surface. I could see stars through an opening about 100 feet above us. I was halfway through the gap when Tom grabbed my arm. "Sam," he said, "the main support pillar, in the central chamber where we found the bones. It's cracked. Set charges there, bring the whole system down." He'd noticed what I'd missed. The creatures had been digging new tunnels for 30 years, weakening the structural supports. The mine was one good explosion away from complete collapse. "How do I get explosives down there?" I asked. Tom smiled weakly and tapped his medical bag. "Emergency flares. Magnesium burns hot enough to compromise support structures. But someone has to get close enough to light them." Behind us, the scratching sounds were getting closer. I could hear voices now, the creatures calling to each other in mining terminology that was 30 years out of date. "Get to the surface," I told Tom. "Radio for backup." "Can't move," he replied. "Internal bleeding's too bad, but I can buy you time." Before I could stop him, he pulled something from his medical bag, a morphine syringe, but the dose was 10 times what any human could survive. "Tell Carol I'm sorry," he said, and injected himself. The overdose would kill him in minutes, but it would also make him useless to the creatures. They wanted living prey, not corpses. I squeezed through the gap and caught up with Jake and Carol just as they reached the surface. We were half a mile from where we'd entered the mine, coming up through a sinkhole hidden by winter brush. "Where's Tom?" Carol asked. I told her. She cried, but she also started moving toward our vehicle. Emergency training took over. Grief later, action now. The radio in our truck worked perfectly. Within an hour, we had state police, emergency services, and a mining safety team on site. I told them about the cave-in, about Tom being trapped, about the need for heavy equipment to clear the tunnels. I didn't tell them about the creatures. Who would have believed it? But I did mention the structural instability to the mining engineer. "Whole system's compromised," I said. "One good blast, and it'll come down like a house of cards." "Best thing for it," he agreed. "Should have been sealed properly 30 years ago." They brought explosives to clear what they thought was rubble blocking the rescue route. I volunteered to guide the placement, claiming I knew the tunnel system best. What I really did was place charges at every major support point Tom had identified. When they went off, the explosion was visible from 5 miles away. The entire hillside collapsed inward, sealing every tunnel and shaft permanently. The official report listed 4 casualties, 6 college students and 1 deputy sheriff, all killed in a tragic cave-in caused by structural failure in an abandoned mine system. Tom's body was never recovered. That was 44 years ago. I'm 83 now, and I've never told this story before. Mary died 2 years back, and my kids have kids of their own. They think their old dad has nightmares because of general cave rescue trauma. They're not wrong, but they're not right either. I never went underground again. Couldn't. The moment I stepped into any enclosed space smaller than a regular room, my hands would shake and my breathing would get shallow. The Forest Service was understanding, transferred me to fire prevention, let me work the surface patrols until I retired. But I never stopped watching the site. The state put up proper barriers, warning signs, and regular inspections. The hillside where the mine used to be is stable, overgrown with 40 years of forest regeneration. Most people driving by wouldn't even know there was a mine there once. Most people. Every few years, someone goes missing in the area. Usually hikers or hunters who wander off marked trails. Search and rescue finds their equipment sometimes, but never the people. The official explanation is always exposure, wild animals, or getting lost in the extensive cave systems that riddle these mountains. I know better. 3 weeks ago, my grandson called. He's a geology student at UK, same school those spelunking kids attended. He wanted to know about the old mines in our area for a research project. "There's some interesting formations in Harlan County," he said. "Local stories about sealed mine systems that might connect to unexplored cave networks." I told him to pick a different research topic. Yesterday, I drove out to the collapse site for the first time in 20 years. The barriers were still intact, the warning signs still posted, but someone had been digging. Not with heavy equipment. This look, like hand tools, working slowly and carefully. The hole wasn't big enough for a person yet, but it was heading in the right direction. And the dirt that had been removed was piled neatly to one side, like someone was planning to put it back when they were finished. I called the Forest Service to report vandalism. They'll fill in the hole and add better security, but I know it won't matter. You see, I made a mistake 44 years ago. I assumed the creatures I saw were the miners who'd been trapped in the '52 disaster. But mining records are funny things, and after Mary died, I had time to do some research at the County Historical Society. The Harlan mine had been in operation since 1923. In those 30 years before the big disaster, there had been dozens of smaller accidents, cave-ins, and disappearances that were never properly investigated. Men who went down for a shift and never came back up, their bodies never found. What if the transformation I witnessed wasn't something that happened to the 1952 survivors? What if it was something much older, a process that had been going on for decades in those deep tunnels? What if the miners I saw in 1981 were just the latest additions to something that had been growing in the darkness since the mine first opened? I sealed the main complex, but Harlan County has dozens of abandoned mines, most of them connected by natural cave systems that were never fully mapped. If even one of those connections survived. I'm telling this story because I'm old, and I won't be around much longer to keep watch. Someone needs to know what's really buried under these mountains and why those barriers need to stay in place. But mostly, I'm telling it because yesterday, when I was examining that fresh dig site, I found something that made my blood run cold. Fresh bite marks on the metal warning signs. Human bite marks. Deep ones. They're still hungry. My name is Robert Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. Before that, I spent 3 years in the Vietnam jungle, learning how to track things that didn't want to be found. I thought that experience would prepare me for anything I might face in the Virginia mountains. I was wrong. It was October 15th, 1976. The leaves were turning, and the Devil's Backbone Ridge was packed with hunters and campers celebrating America's 200th birthday. The whole area was busier than I'd ever seen it. That should have been my first warning. I was sitting in my truck, finishing my morning coffee, when the radio crackled to life. "Ranger Blackthorn, we need you at Devil's Backbone immediately. We have a missing Boy Scout troop." My stomach dropped. A missing kid was every ranger's nightmare. A whole troop was unthinkable. "How many?" I asked. 12 boys, 3 adult leaders. They were supposed to check in yesterday evening. No word since Tuesday morning. I drove up the winding mountain road as fast as I dared. The Devil's Backbone got its name from the way the rocky ridge looked like a giant spine sticking up from the forest. Local folks had always said strange things happened up there. Old stories about disappearances, weird sounds in the night. I'd always figured it was just mountain talk. The search coordinator, Jim Hayes, met me at the base camp. He was a good man, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "Bob, we've got 50 people ready to go. State police, local volunteers, even some National Guard boys on leave." "Where was their last known position?" "Campsite 12, about 3 miles up the North Trail, right on the ridge." I knew that spot. It was isolated, surrounded by thick laurel bushes and steep drop-offs. Good for camping if you wanted privacy, bad for camping if something went wrong. We hiked up in groups of 4. The October air was crisp, but sweat was already beading on my forehead. Something felt off. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed muted. When we reached Campsite 12, I stopped dead in my tracks. The campsite looked like a bomb had gone off. 3 tents were shredded, not cut, but torn apart like tissue paper. Sleeping bags were scattered everywhere, some hanging from tree branches 20 feet up. Cooking gear was crushed and twisted. "Jesus Christ," whispered Tom Morrison, one of the volunteers. I walked around the edge of the campsite looking for tracks, for any sign of what had happened. That's when I saw them. Deep gouges in the bark of a massive oak tree. 4 parallel scratches, each one as wide as my thumb, running from 8 feet high down to the ground. Whatever made those marks had claws like railroad spikes. "Bear attack?" asked Jim. I'd seen bear attacks. This wasn't a bear. The scratches were too deep, too precise. And there was something else. The pattern was wrong. Bears swipe randomly when they're angry or scared. These marks looked almost deliberate. "Maybe," I said, but I was already doubting it. We found the first piece of evidence that made my blood run cold about an hour later. It was a torn piece of a Boy Scout uniform caught on a thorn bush half a mile from the campsite. The fabric was soaked with blood, and there were holes in it that looked like someone had driven railroad spikes through the cloth. More search teams arrived as the day went on. By evening, we had over 100 people combing the mountain. As darkness fell, we set up floodlights and kept searching. Nobody wanted to say it, but we all knew we weren't looking for survivors anymore. That night, I stayed at the base camp, coordinating search grids on a topographic map. Around midnight, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A howl echoed a Cararoo. Ross the mountain. Not a wolf howl or a dog. This was deeper, more human. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, rising and falling like a siren. Then silence. "What the hell was that?" asked one of the state troopers. I didn't answer because I didn't know. But something in that sound reminded me of things I'd tried to forget. Sounds I'd heard in the Vietnamese jungle, when the Viet Cong would mimic animal calls to confuse us. This felt like that. Like something was trying to sound like an animal, but couldn't quite get it right. The next morning, we found the first body. Danny Rodriguez, one of the volunteer searchers, spotted something red hanging from a tree about 200 yards from the main campsite. It was a Boy Scout neckerchief, but it wasn't just hanging there. It was tied around what was left of a human arm. The arm had been torn off at the shoulder. not cut, torn, like someone had grabbed it and twisted until the bones snapped and the muscles ripped apart. The bone at the shoulder was splintered into white fragments. Dr. Sarah Chen, the medical examiner, arrived by helicopter around noon. She was a small woman who'd seen everything in her 20 years on the job. But when she looked at that arm, her face went white. "This wasn't done by any animal I know," she told me quietly, away from the other searchers. "The damage is too extensive, too violent. Whatever did this was incredibly strong." "How strong?" "Strong enough to rip a human arm off like pulling wings off a fly." We found more pieces over the next few hours. A leg, still wearing a hiking boot, caught in the branches of a pine tree. Part of a torso, mangled beyond recognition. Each piece was found farther from the campsite, like something had been carrying them and dropping them as it moved through the forest. The worst part was the pattern. The pieces weren't scattered randomly. They formed a rough line pointing deeper into the mountains, toward the heart of the Devil's Backbone Ridge. Around 3 in the afternoon, we found the tracks. I was following a game trail about half a mile north of the campsite when I saw them. Footprints pressed deep into the soft earth beside a creek. At first glance, they looked like bear prints, but bigger, much bigger. Each print was nearly 2 feet long and 8 inches wide. The claw marks extended another 6 inches beyond the toe pads. But there was something wrong with the shape. Bear paws are round and wide. These were longer, more narrow, more like... "They look almost human," said Jim, who'd come up behind me. He was right. The proportions were all wrong for any animal I knew. Too long, too narrow, but with massive claws that had sunk deep into the mud. I knelt down and put my hand next to one of the prints for scale. The print was 3 times the size of my hand. Whatever made this track weighed at least 800 pounds, maybe more. "We need to call in more help," I said. That night, we set up a perimeter around the search area. National Guard troops arrived with military equipment and night vision gear. The official story was that we were dealing with a rogue bear, possibly rabid, definitely dangerous. But I'd fought in Vietnam. I knew what real danger felt like. This was something else entirely. I was standing guard duty around midnight when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps moving through the forest about 100 yards from our camp. The sound came closer, then stopped. I grabbed my rifle and flicked on my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the tree line. Nothing. But I could feel something watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and my hands started to sweat. In Vietnam, we called it the stare. That feeling you got when enemy eyes were on you, studying you, deciding whether to kill you or not. The footsteps started again, circling our camp, always just out of sight, always in the shadows. This went on for an hour. Whatever was out there was smart enough to stay hidden, but bold enough to let us know it was there. Just before dawn, the footsteps stopped, but scratched into the bark of a tree at the edge of our camp were fresh claw marks. 4 deep, gouges, still bleeding sap. The message was clear. We know where you are. By the 3rd day, we'd found pieces of 8 different people. Not whole bodies, just parts. Arms, legs, chunks of torso. It was like something had taken them apart piece by piece. The National Guard commander, Major Phillips, called in a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment. If there were any survivors hiding in the woods, the heat sensors would find them. The helicopter took off around noon, sweeping back and forth across the ridge. 20 minutes later, the pilot's voice came over the radio, tight with fear. "Base camp, we've got a problem. There's something down here, and it's big." "Define big," said Major Phillips. "Bigger than anything I've ever seen. It's moving through the trees about 2 miles north of your position. Thermal signature suggests something the size of a small car." "A bear?" Long pause. "No, sir. This thing is walking upright." The helicopter circled for another 10 minutes, trying to get a better look. Then the pilot's voice came back, this time barely controlled panic. "It's throwing rocks at us. Rocks the size of bowling balls. We're getting out of here." The helicopter landed hard at base camp, the pilot white as a sheet. "That thing down there," he said, "it's not natural. It looked right at us, right through the canopy, and it knew exactly what we were. Then it started throwing rocks with perfect accuracy. No animal does that. That afternoon, we lost our first searcher. Mike Torres, a state trooper with 15 years' experience, was working a grid pattern about a mile from base camp. His radio check was at 2:30 p.m. By 3 o'clock, when he missed his next check, we knew something was wrong. We found his body at 4:15. He was hanging upside down from a tree branch, 30 feet off the ground. His duty belt was gone, his service weapon missing. But the worst part was his face. The look of absolute terror frozen in his dead eyes. Dr. Chen determined that he'd been alive when he was hung up there, alive and conscious, watching something approach through the trees. Something that had scared him so badly, his heart had stopped before it even touched him. No wounds on the body, she reported. He died of cardiac arrest brought on by extreme shock and terror. Whatever he saw down there literally scared him to death. That night, Major Phillips made the decision to pull back all search teams to base camp. "We're dealing with something that's actively hunting us," he announced. "From now on, nobody goes out alone. Nobody goes out without radio contact every 15 minutes. And nobody goes out without military backup." But it was too late. The thing in the woods had decided we were a threat. Around 2 a.m. it came for us. I was on perimeter guard when I heard the first scream. It came from the north side of camp where 2 soldiers had been stationed. By the time we got there, both men were gone. Their rifles were on the ground, unfired. Their boots were still laced up, but their feet weren't in them anymore. The trail led into the dark forest, marked by drops of blood and deep footprints in the soft earth. But nobody was willing to follow it in the dark. We could hear something moving out there just beyond the reach of our floodlights. Something big, circling our camp, studying us. "What do you think it wants?" asked Jim. I thought about the way the bodies had been arranged, the deliberate placement of evidence, the timing of the attacks. This wasn't random violence. This was strategy. "I think it wants us gone," I said, "and I think it's willing to kill every one of us to make that happen." The attacks continued all night. Never a direct assault, just quick strikes at the edges of our perimeter. A soldier would step away from the light to leave himself and vanish. A supply tent would be torn apart while the guards were looking the other way. Each attack was swift, silent, and surgical. By dawn, we'd lost 6 more people. Major Phillips radioed for evacuation helicopters, but the thing in the woods had anticipated that too. When the first chopper approached, something huge came crashing through the trees. A boulder the size of a refrigerator flew through the air and clipped the helicopter's tail rotor. The pilot managed to land without killing anyone, but the message was clear. Nothing was getting in or out of Devil's Backbone Ridge as long as that thing was alive. We were trapped on the mountain with something that was smarter than us, stronger than us, and very, very hungry. On the 4th night, I made a decision that probably saved my life and definitely changed it forever. I was going to hunt this thing down myself. Major Phillips thought I was crazy. "Blackthorn, we've got 20 armed soldiers here, and this thing is picking us off one by one. What makes you think you can do alone what we can't do together?" "Because together we're predictable," I said. "It knows where we are, how we move, how we think. But alone, using jungle tactics, maybe I can get close enough to figure out what we're really dealing with." The truth was, I couldn't stand watching good people die while we sat around making plans. In Vietnam, when you were being hunted, you had 2 choices: become the hunter or become the prey. I left base camp at midnight, carrying only my rifle, a combat knife, and enough water for 3 days. I moved through the forest the way my drill sergeant had taught me, using every shadow, every sound, every breath of wind to stay invisible. The creature's territory seemed to center around a series of caves about 2 miles north of the main campsite. The closer I got, the worse the smell became. It was like rotten meat mixed with wet animal fur and something else I couldn't identify. Something wild and alien. I found the cave entrance just as the sun was coming up. The opening was big enough to drive a truck through. The walls were covered with scratch marks, some old and weathered, others fresh and still bleeding tree sap. But it was the bones scattered around the entrance that made my blood freeze. Human bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Some were old and yellow, others were fresh and still had meat on them. They were arranged in patterns like some kind of primitive art. Skulls stacked in pyramids. Arm bones laid out in geometric designs. This wasn't the first time this thing had killed people. It had been hunting humans for years, maybe decades. I was studying the bone patterns when I heard breathing behind me. Slow, deep breaths, like a bellows working. Each exhale sounded like steam escaping from a boiler. I turned around slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. It was standing about 50 feet away, partially hidden in the shadows between two massive oak trees. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was too big, too wrong, too impossible. The thing stood 12 feet tall on its hind legs. Its body was like a bear's, but stretched and twisted into something more human. Its arms were longer than they should be, reaching almost to the ground. Its hands ended in claws that looked like black daggers. But it was the face that nearly stopped my heart. It was almost human. Not quite, but close enough to be deeply disturbing. The eyes were yellow and intelligent, studying me the way a scientist might study an interesting insect. The mouth was full of teeth designed for tearing meat, but the expression was calculating, thoughtful. It knew I was there. It had known I was coming long before I arrived, and it was deciding what to do with me. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it tilted its head to one side like a curious dog. When it spoke, its voice was like rocky, legs grinding together. "You smell different." The words were barely recognizable as human speech, but they were words. This thing could talk. "Different how?" I managed to ask. "Blood, war, death. No, death." My hands were shaking, but I kept my rifle pointed at its chest. Not that I thought bullets would do much good against something that size, but it made me feel better. "I know you've been killing people," I said. "Why?" It moved closer, and I could see the scars covering its hide. Bullet wounds, knife cuts, even what looked like burn marks. This thing had been fighting humans for a long time. "They come into my place. Take my food. Leave poison. Smells." It was talking about the campground, I realized. To this creature, the entire mountain was its territory, and we were invaders. "We'll leave," I said. "All of us. We'll never come back." It laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Too late. Taste of man, blood. Too good. Now." That's when I knew there was no negotiating with this thing. It had developed a taste for human flesh, and it wasn't going to stop killing until every person on the mountain was dead. The fight lasted less than a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. The creature moved faster than anything that big had a right to move. One second it was 50 feet away. The next it was swinging a massive claw at my head. I dove to the side, firing my rifle as I rolled. The bullets hit its chest and bounced off like pebbles. Its hide was thick as armor plating. It grabbed a boulder the size of a watermelon and threw it at me. I barely got behind a tree before the rock smashed into the trunk, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. I had one advantage: the terrain. I knew these mountains, and I knew how to use the landscape as a weapon. There was an old mining shaft about 200 yards up the slope, with unstable rock formations on both sides. I ran, zigzagging between trees, listening to the creature crashing through the forest behind me. Its breathing was getting heavier, more labored. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't used to long chases. The mine shaft opened up ahead of me, a black hole in the side of the mountain. The supports were rotten, the ceiling held up by nothing but luck and prayer. If I could get the creature inside... I turned and emptied my rifle at the rock formation above the mine entrance. The bullets chipped away at the key support points, loosening tons of stone that were already ready to fall. The creature saw what I was doing and charged straight at me, roaring with fury. It was still 20 feet away when the ceiling came down. The rock slide buried the mine entrance under thousands of tons of stone. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, from somewhere deep underground, I heard scratching, clawing. The thing was still alive, trapped, but not dead. I spent 3 days in the hospital before I was strong enough to tell anyone what had happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge. The official report listed the incident as a rogue bear attack. 18 people dead, including 12 Boy Scouts who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The area around Devil's Backbone was closed to the public indefinitely. The Forest Service put up signs warning of unstable rock formations and dangerous wildlife. But I know the real reason they keep people away. That creature is still down there. Sometimes, late at night, hikers report hearing sounds coming from deep underground. Scratching, clawing, and what sounds almost like words in a language that was never meant for human throats. The military keeps a small monitoring station about 5 miles from the old mine shaft. They tell people it's for weather research, but I know better. They're watching and listening, waiting for the day when that thing finally digs its way out. I retired from the Ranger Service 6 months after the Devil's Backbone incident. The official reason was in injuries sustained in the line of duty. The real reason was that I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes staring at me, calculating, planning. My ex-wife thinks I'm crazy. My son won't return my phone calls. Dr. Patterson, the psychiatrist the department made me see, says I'm suffering from severe PTSD complicated by elaborate fantasy construction. He thinks I made up the whole story to cope with survivor's guilt. Maybe he's right. Maybe there never was any 12-foot creature with human intelligence and a taste for blood. Maybe I just cracked under the pressure of losing all those people and invented a monster to blame. But I know what I saw. I know what I fought. And I know it's still down there, getting stronger, getting hungrier, waiting for the right moment to finish what it started. The Devil's Backbone Ridge is quiet now. No more camping, no more hiking, no more Boy Scout troops learning about nature and brotherhood. The forest has reclaimed the old campgrounds, and weeds grow through the abandoned fire rings. But sometimes, on clear nights when the wind is just right, you can still hear sounds coming from deep in those mountains. Sounds that might be the settling of old rocks, or the calling of nightbirds, or the echo of something ancient and hungry scratching its way back to the surface. I keep a loaded rifle by my bed now, not because I think it would do any good against something like that, but because it helps me sleep. Most nights, anyway. Last week, I got a call from Major Phillips. 3 hikers had gone missing in the George Washington National Forest, about 20 miles south of Devil's Backbone. Their campsite was found destroyed, their gear scattered across 2 acres of mountainside. The local ranger found tracks, big ones, too big to be from any known animal. "We could use your expertise," Phillips said. I told him I was retired, told him to call someone else, someone younger, someone who still believed that monsters were just stories we told to scare children. But I know I'll end up going, because, see, somewhere in those dark mountains, something is hunting again. And like it or not, I'm the only one who knows how to hunt it back. The Devil's Backbone Massacre was just the beginning. The real war hasn't even started yet. My name is Daniel Ashford, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. Started right after I came back from the Pacific in '45. People always ask why I chose this job after the war. Truth is, after seeing what men can do to each other on those islands, I thought the mountains would be peaceful. Safe, even. I was wrong about that. It was late September 1962 when the call came in. I was sitting in my kitchen, watching my boys Tommy and Jake fight over the last piece of Ruth's apple pie. Ruth was grading papers at the table, her red pen moving across essays about what the kids did over summer break. Normal stuff. Good stuff. The phone rang at 8:47 p.m. I remember because I checked my watch, thinking it was late for park business. "Ashford here?" "Daniel, it's Chief Morrison. We got a problem. Family of 5 from Ohio supposed to check out 2 days ago. Campsite 23 near Cataract Falls. Nobody's seen them." I set down my coffee. Cataract Falls was my territory. 23 miles deep in the backcountry, steep hollow, thick woods, and that 200-foot waterfall that sounded like thunder even on quiet days. Could be they just decided to stay longer, I said, though something in my gut told me different. Negative. I called the number they left. Wife's sister is worried sick. Says they had theater tickets for yesterday in Columbus. Never missed a family event in 20 years. I looked at Ruth. She was watching me with those green eyes that had seen me through too many nightmares. She knew I was going out before I said it. I'll take Collins and Martinez. Head out first light. Be careful, Daniel. Weather's been strange up there. Hikers been reporting odd things. What kind of odd things? Animals acting weird. Birds going quiet for no reason. Probably nothing, but I'll keep my eyes open. After I hung up, Ruth came over and put her hand on my shoulder. Our fingers were warm and steady. Bad feeling? She asked. Maybe. Family with 3 kids doesn't just vanish. She nodded. Ruth understood about bad feelings. Living with a man who woke up screaming about Guadalcanal taught her to trust those feelings. That night, I checked my gear twice. Compass, knife, first aid kit, rope. Everything a man needed to bring people home safe. The nightmares didn't come that night, which should have been a good sign. It wasn't. We started before dawn. Collins was 24, eager, always asking questions about tracking. Martinez had been with the service for 8 years, solid and quiet. Good men to have in the woods. The drive to the trailhead took 2 hours on winding mountain roads. Fog hung in the valleys like smoke, and the trees were just starting to turn. Beautiful country, the kind that made you forget the world had ugly things in it. We found their car at the parking area. Green Plymouth wagon with Ohio plates covered in dew. I looked inside. Maps on the dashboard. Thermos still half full of coffee. Kids' coloring books in the back seat. Normal family stuff. Tracks lead up Trail 7, Martinez called out. He was kneeling by the tree line, studying the ground. 5 people, different size boots. Heaviest prints in back, probably the dad. We followed the trail up into the hollow. It was a beautiful morning, crisp and clear. The kind of day that made you glad to be alive in the mountains. Birds were singing, squirrels chattering in the oaks. Everything normal, for the first 3 miles. Then the birds went quiet. I stopped walking and held up my hand. Collins and Martinez froze behind me. You hear that? I whispered. I don't hear anything, Collins said. That's the problem. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves. Even our breathing sounded too loud. In 17 years of walking these mountains, I'd never heard siltae, ants like that. It felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. We kept moving, but I checked my compass more often. It was pointing true north, steady as always. My daddy gave me that compass when I was 12, and it never let me down. We found their campsite around noon. The tents were still standing, arranged in a neat circle around a cold fire pit. But something was wrong with the picture. Gear was scattered everywhere. Sleeping bags pulled out and torn. Pots and pans thrown around like a windstorm hit. But there was no wind damage to the tents. Looks like they left in a hurry, Colin said, picking up a child's sneaker. I walked the perimeter, studying the ground. The family's tracks were clear enough, coming into camp, setting up normal activity. But then there were other tracks. Bigger ones. Bare feet, but wrong somehow. Martinez, come look at this. He knelt beside me at the edge of camp. The print was clear in the soft dirt. 16 inches long, narrow like a human foot, but stretched out. 5 toes, but they ended in what looked like claw marks. Could be a bear, Martinez said, but his voice wasn't convinced. You ever see a bear with toes like that? No, sir. I took pictures with my camera, measured the prints. They led away from camp, deeper into the hollow toward the waterfall. Mixed in with them were the family's footprints, but those tracks looked wrong too, not like people walking, like people running. Boss, you need to see this. Collins was standing by a big oak tree at the edge of camp. 20 feet up the trunk, something had gouged deep scratches in the bark. 4 parallel lines, each one 3 inches deep in solid wood. "What could reach that high?" Collins asked. I stood under the tree and looked up. Even jumping, I couldn't get close to those marks, and the force needed to dig that deep into oak. I'd seen what mortar shells could do to trees. This was worse. "Let's follow the tracks," I said. We followed them for an hour, deeper into the hollow. The silence stayed with us. No birds, no insects, just our boots on. The trail and the distant sound of the waterfall getting louder. The tracks led us off the main trail, down into thick rhododendron bushes. The undergrowth was so dense we had to crawl in places. Then Collins called out from ahead. "Found something!" Caught on a thorny branch about 10 feet off the ground was a piece of cloth, pink with little flowers. A child's shirt, torn like something had ripped it right off her body. There were dark stains on it. "How did it get up there?" Collins asked, staring at the fabric fluttering in the breeze. I didn't answer because I was looking at the ground beneath it. More of those strange tracks. But now they were mixed with something else, long drag marks in the dirt, like something heavy being pulled. And at the end of the marks, drops of blood. My compass started acting strange. The needle swung back and forth, never settling on true north. I tapped it, shook it, but it kept spinning like it couldn't find magnetic north. "Radio's getting interference too," Martinez said, holding up his walkie-talkie. Static filled the air, broken by sounds that might have been voices, might have been something else. We found the first body an hour later. She was maybe 8 years old, blonde hair and pigtails. They'd hung her from a tree branch 30 feet up, but that wasn't what killed her. Her eyes were gone, just empty sockets staring down at us. Her mouth was open like she'd been screaming when she died. Collins threw up in the bushes. Martinez crossed himself and started praying in Spanish. I just stood there, looking up at that little girl, feeling something cold settle in my chest. In the war, I'd seen terrible things. Bodies torn apart by shells, men burned by flamethrowers. But this was different. This was personal, cruel. Like whatever did it wanted her to suffer. "We need to call this in," Martinez said. I keyed my radio. Static ants. Whirred me, filled with sounds that made my skin crawl. Voices talking backwards, or children crying, or something that might have been laughter. "No signal. We're on our own until we get back. To the car." "What do we do with—" Collins pointed up at the girl. "We can't get her down without equipment. Mark the spot on the map. We need to find the others." But I was lying. I knew we weren't going to find the others. Not alive. Whatever had done this to a little girl wasn't going to show mercy to anyone else. As we walked away, I looked back once. The girl's body was swaying gently in the wind, and for just a second, I thought I saw her head turn to watch us leave. But that was impossible, wasn't it? We found the second body before sunset. The father was wedged in a crack between 2 boulders, 40 feet up the cliff face beside the waterfall. His arms and legs were bent in ways that human joints don't bend, like something had grabbed him and just squeezed until everything broke. "How did he get up there?" Collins asked, his voice shaking. I studied the rock face through my binoculars. Smooth stone, no handholds, no way a man could climb it. But there were scratches in the rock. The same 4-line pattern we'd seen on the oak tree, only deeper. Whatever made those marks could climb straight up solid stone. "We need to get out of here," Martinez said. "This isn't natural. We can't leave without finding the others." "Daniel, look around. Those people are dead, all of them, and whatever killed them is still out here." He was right, but I'd been a soldier before I was a ranger, and soldiers don't leave people behind. Even dead people deserve to go home. The fog started rolling in as the sun went down, thick and gray, like nothing I'd ever seen in these mountains. It moved wrong, flowing uphill instead of settling in the valleys. Within minutes, I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. "Stay close," I called out. "Link up, hand to shoulder." We moved like a chain through the mist, following what I hoped was the trail back toward the main path. But my comp, ass was spinning like a top, and every tree looked the same in the gray. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from everywhere at once, echoing off the rocks and trees. Not human, but not animal either. Something in between, like a person trying to sound like something else. It started low and rose up until it hurt my ears, then cut off sudden as a knife. "What was that?" Collins whispered. Before I could answer, it screamed again. But this time, it sounded like the little girl we'd found, her voice calling for help. "Daddy! Daddy, where are you? I'm scared!" Martinez grabbed my arm. "That's not her. She's dead. Please help me, I can't see, it's so dark." The voice moved around us in the fog, sometimes close enough to touch, sometimes far away, but always that little girl's voice, begging for help. Collins started moving toward the sound. "Don't," I said, grabbing his shoulder. "It's not her." "But what if—" "She's dead, son. We saw her body." The voice changed then, getting angry. "Why won't you help me? I'm just a little girl. Don't you want to save me?" Then it laughed, and the laugh was wrong in ways that made my teeth ache. Too deep, too long, too full of hate. The fog started to thin, and I could see shapes moving in it. Tall shapes that didn't look right. They moved too smoothly, like they were floating instead of walking. "Run," I said. We ran through the forest, crashing through bushes and jumping over fallen logs. Behind us, that thing kept laughing, and the sound followed us like it was coming from inside our heads. I led them toward where I thought the trail was, but nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. Even the smell was wrong, like something rotting just out of sight. Martinez fell behind. I heard him crash into something and cry out, then his voice cut off. When I looked back, the fog had swallowed him. "Martine, just," I called. Silence. "We have to go back for him," Collins said. "No, keep moving." "But he's gone, son. We stop now. We're all gone." Collins looked at me like I'd hit him, but he kept running. We ran for what felt like hours, until our lungs burned and our legs shook. Finally, we stumbled onto the main trail. I checked my watch. It was past midnight. We'd been running for 6 hours, but it felt like we'd only been in the fog for minutes. "Where's Martinez?" Collins asked. I didn't answer because I could see something hanging from a tree up ahead. Something that wore Martinez's uniform. They'd gutted him like a deer and strung him up by his feet. His blood had painted the tree trunk black in the moonlight, but his eyes were gone, just like the little girl's. Collins saw it and started screaming. Not words, just sound, like his mind had broken. He ran into the forest, crashing through the bushes. "Collins, come back!" But he was gone, swallowed by the dark between the trees. I stood alone on the trail with Martinez's body swaying above me, and for the first time since the war, I was truly afraid. Something moved in the shadows, and I heard Collins scream one more time. Then silence. I was alone. I made it back to the waterfall just before dawn, though I couldn't remember walking there. My mind felt fuzzy, like I was dreaming but couldn't wake up. The fog had lifted, but the silence remained. No birds, no insects, no sound except the water falling on rocks. I found Collins at the base of the falls. They'd broken every bone in his body before they killed him. He was twisted into a shape that hurt to look at, arms and legs bent backward, spine curved like a question mark. But he was still breathing. "Daniel," he whispered when he saw me. Blood bubbled from his mouth. It talked to me. It knew things. About my wife. About my daughter. "Don't talk. Save your strength." "No. Listen. It's not just an animal. It thinks. It plans." His eyes were wide with pain and fear. It wanted me to bring it to town, to the schools, to the children. "What? Head is it, Collins? What did you see?" "Old. So old. Been here since before the Cherokee. It feeds on fear, on pain. The more afraid you are, the stronger it gets." His hand grabbed my shirt, fingers like ice. "Don't let it see you're scared. It can smell fear. That's how it finds you." Collins died then, his last breath rattling in his throat. I closed his eyes and said a prayer, then I heard something behind me. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone taking their time. I turned around and saw it. 8 feet tall, thin as a rail, skin white as bone. Its arms hung down to its knees, ending in hands that looked more like claws. But it was the face that made my blood freeze. Almost human, but stretched out, like someone had pulled it like taffy. The eyes were completely black, no whites at all, just holes in its skull. It stood at the edge of the woods, watching me. Not moving, not breathing, just watching with those terrible eyes. "Hello, Daniel," it said, and its voice was my old war buddy Jimmy's voice. Jimmy, who died on Guadalcanal, who I'd held while he bled out in my arms. "You're not Jimmy." "Sure I am, pal. Don't you recognize your old friend?" It smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "I've been waiting for you, waiting so long. What do you want?" "Same thing I always wanted, to go home, to see my family. But I can't do that alone, Daniel. I need help. I need you to show me the way." It took a step closer, and I saw that it wasn't walking. Its feet didn't quite touch the ground. It glided forward like it was swimming through air. "Stay back." "Don't be afraid, Daniel. I'm your friend. I've always been your friend." Its voice was so much like Jimmy's that for a second I almost believed it. But then it laughed, and the laugh was all wrong. Jimmy never laughed like that, cruel and hungry. I pulled out my service pistol and fired 6 shots, mass. The bullets went right through it like it was made of smoke. It looked down at the holes in its chest, then back at me. "That's not very friendly, Daniel." It moved fast then, faster than anything that size should move. 1 second it was 20 feet away, the next it was right in front of me. Its hand wrapped around my throat and its touch burned like ice. Up close I could smell it. Death and rot and something else. Something older, like the earth at the bottom of a grave. "I'm going to eat your eyes," it whispered with Jimmy's voice. "Just like I ate the others. And then I'm going to wear your face and visit your family, your pretty wife Ruth, your boys." That's when I understood what Collins meant about fear. The thing was feeding on my terror, getting stronger as I got more afraid. I could feel it pulling the fear out of me like poison from a wound. So I did something that surprised it. I stopped being afraid. It sounds impossible, but 17 years of nightmares had taught me how to control fear. In the war, when the shells were falling and men were dying, you learned to put the fear in a box and lock it away. I did that now. The thing's grip loosened, its black eyes widened. "What? What are you doing?" "Something you don't understand," I said. "I'm choosing not to be afraid of you." It let go of my throat and stepped back. For the first time it looked uncertain. "You should be afraid. I killed your friends. I'm going to kill you." "Maybe. But not because I'm afraid. You're just another predator in the woods. I've dealt with predators before." The thing hissed like a snake and swung its claws at me. I rolled away and came up running. It chased me, screaming in frustration, but it was slower now, weaker. I ran for the trail, focusing on staying calm. Every time fear crept in, I pushed it down. "Think about Ruth," I told myself. "Think about the boys. Think about getting home." Behind me, the thing roared like a wounded animal. It threw rocks the size of cars, trying to crush me. One boulder missed my head by inches and shattered again, just a tree. But it wasn't following anymore. I could hear it back at the waterfall, destroying everything it could reach, frustrated because its prey had escaped. I made it to the parking lot as the sun came up. My hands were shaking as I started the car, but not from fear, from exhaustion. I drove straight to Chief Morrison's office and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his face getting more concerned with every word. "We'll have to close that section of the park," he said when I finished. "For how long?" "Indefinitely. We'll call it an erosion study or something. Can't have hikers going back there." "What about the bodies? The families deserve to know what happened to their people." Morrison was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Bear attack. Tragic, But these things happen in the wilderness. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. Who would believe the truth? That was 3 months ago. The area around Cataract Falls has been closed ever since. Official reason is geological instability. Signs posted every 100 yards warning hikers to stay out. But people still go missing sometimes. Usually it's teenagers looking for a thrill, or hunters who think the signs don't apply to them. We find their cars at the parking area, but we never find them. I transferred to administrative duties after my report. Morrison said I needed time to process the trauma of losing my team. He wasn't wrong, but that wasn't why I couldn't go back to the backcountry. Ruth knows something happened up there. She sees it in the way I wake up at night, listening to sounds that aren't there. The way I check the locks 3 times before bed. The way I watch the tree line when the boys are playing in the yard. "You want to talk about it?" she asked me last week. "No? Might help. Might make it worse." She didn't push. Ruth understands about things you can't talk about. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I think about what Colin said, about it wanting to come to town, to the schools, to the children. I've been keeping track of missing person reports from other parks in Appalachian, Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, West Virginia. Same pattern every time. Families or hikers vanishing without a trace. Official causes listed as bear attacks or falls or getting lost. But I know better. There's more than one of those things out there. Maybe dozens, maybe hundreds. They've been here longer than we have, longer than the Cherokee, longer than anyone. Waiting in the deep woods, feeding on fear and pain. Most people are safe because most people don't go to the remote places where they hunt. But every year more folks want to explore the wilderness, more people pushing deeper into the backcountry, and they're always hungry. I keep my service pistol loaded now, even though I know bullets don't work. I keep a compass that points true north, even though they can make it spin like a toy. I keep a radio that connects to the outside world, even though they can fill it with voices of the dead. Because someday, one of them might decide that Cataract Falls isn't enough. Someday, one might decide to come to town. When that happens, I'll be ready. At least, I hope I will. The thing about fear is that it never really goes away. You just learn to live with it. And every night when I kiss my boys goodnight and tuck them into bed, I listen to the sounds outside their window. Most nights, it's just wind in the trees. But not always. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear something that sounds like Jimmy's voice calling my name from the forest behind our house. That's when I check the locks one more time. My name is Catherine Ironwood, and I need to tell you what really happened on Grandfather Mountain in October of 1973. I was a park ranger then, the first woman to hold that job in our district. Some folks didn't like that much, but I didn't care. I'd worked too hard to get there. I grew up poor in coal country, where the mountains were black with dust and the men came home coughing blood. My daddy died in a mine collapse when I was 12. That's when I knew I wanted to work outdoors, but in clean air under blue skies. The Park Service saved me from that life. By 1973, I'd been a ranger for 12 years. I knew every trail, every cliff, every hidden valley in my section of the Blue Ridge. I could rappel down a 300-foot rock face or track a lost hiker through fog so thick you couldn't see your own boots. The mountains were my home, and I thought I knew all their secrets. I was wrong. It started on October 15th, a Tuesday morning when the leaves were at their peak. Red maples blazed like fire against the gray granite cliffs. The air was sharp and clean, with that bite that means winter's coming soon. I was drinking coffee at my station when the radio crackled. "Base to Ranger Ironwood. We got a situation at Rough Ridge." I grabbed the radio. "What kind of situation?" "Dispatch. Rock climber didn't come home last night. His buddy says they were climbing the north face yesterday. Found his car still in the parking area." I sighed. Another weekend warrior who bit off more than he could chew. "I'm on my way." The drive to Rough Ridge took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. The parking area sat at 4,100 feet, where the air was thin and the wind never stopped. I found the worried friend pacing next to a blue Volkswagen van. "You the rescue lady?" he asked. He was maybe 25, with long hair and nervous eyes. "Name's Dave. My buddy Tom went up the north face yesterday around noon. Said he'd be back by dark, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "I'd done this dance 100 times. What's his experience level?" "He's good. Real good. Been climbing for 5 years. That's why I'm worried. Tom doesn't take stupid risks." I studied the cliff face through binoculars. The north face was a beast, sheer granite that went straight up for 300 feet. I could see a red dot about halfway up. That would be the climber. "I'll need to rappel down to him," I told Dave. "Could take a few hours." The wind picked up as I geared up. My altimeter was acting funny. The needle kept jumping around like it couldn't make up its mind. I tapped it hard and it settled down. Cheap government equipment. I rappelled over the edge and started my descent. The rock was solid granite, worn smooth by thousands of years of wind and rain. About halfway down, I found Tom. I wish I could forget what I saw. Tom was still clipped to the rock face, his rope intact. But his body, God help me, his body looked like something had tried to tear him apart with giant claws. His chest was opened up, ribs showing white against the red. His face was gone. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. There were claw marks carved deep into the solid granite around him. Not scratches, but gouges 3 inches deep and 8 inches long. I'd never seen anything like it. I forced myself to stay professional, took photos, documented everything, got Tom's remains ready for transport. But my hands were shaking as I worked. In 12 years of mountain rescue, I'd seen bear attacks, falls, hypothermia, everything nature could throw at a person. This was different. This was wrong. Back at the ranger station, I spread the photos across my desk. My supervisor, Jim Walsh, studied them with a frown. Jim was old-school mountain folk, been working these hills since before I was born. "Bear attack," he said finally. "Big one. Jim, look at these claw marks in the rock. What bear can carve granite?" He shrugged. "Rock was probably cracked already. Bear just widened it up while it was feeding." I wanted to argue, but I knew that tone. Case closed in Jim's mind. Still, something nagged at me. I'd grown up hearing mountain stories, tales of strange things in the deep woods. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Cherokee spirits that lived in these hills. But I was an educated woman now. I knew those were just superstitions to scare children. The next morning, I hiked back to Rough Ridge to collect more evidence. The climbing route was still closed with yellow tape. I was photographing the claw marks when I heard voices below. 2 more climbers were gearing up at the base of the cliff. Young guys, college age. "Hey," I called down, "this area's closed." "Come on, lady," one shouted back. "We drove 4 hours to get here." There was a fatal accident yesterday. This route is off limits until further notice. They argued for a few minutes, but eventually packed up and left. I finished my work and hiked back to my truck. Something made me look back one more time at the cliff face. That's when I saw them. Tracks in the soft dirt near the tree line. At first glance, they looked like bear prints, but bears don't walk on 2 legs. These tracks showed a creature that had stood upright and walked like a man. Each print was 14 inches long and 6 inches wide. The claws had left gouges in the hard-packed earth. I followed the trail for a 1/4 mile before it disappeared on bare rock. The tracks led away from the climbing area, deeper into the wilderness where no trails went. My GPS started acting up. The screen kept flickering, showing impossible elevation readings. That night, I called my friend Sarah at the State Wildlife Office. I need to know what could make claw marks 3 inches deep in granite. "Nothing I can think of," Sarah said. "Even a grizzly bear, which we don't have here, couldn't do that." "You sure about what you saw?" "I measured them myself." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Catherine, I've been getting weird reports from all over the district. Hunters finding deer carcasses torn apart and left to rot. Hikers hearing sounds they can't identify. Something's got the wildlife spooked." After I hung up, I sat on my porch with a beer and watched the sun set behind the ridgeline. The mountains were beautiful and peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dark trees. 2 days later, the second climber disappeared. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was an experienced mountaineer from North Carolina. His wife called when he didn't come home from what was supposed to be a day trip to Rough Ridge. "He knows those cliffs like the back of his hand," she told me over the phone. "Marcus wouldn't take unnecessary risks. We have 2 small children." I found his car in the same parking area where Tom had left his van. Marcus's climbing rope was still anchored at the top of the cliff, but it had been cut clean through about 100 feet down. Not frayed or broken, cut, like someone had taken a giant pair of scissors to it. I rappelled down to where the rope ended, expecting to find Marcus's body at the bottom of the cliff. But there was no body. Just blood on the rocks, and more of those impossible claw marks carved deep into the granite. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound that came from somewhere deep in the mountain. A roar so low and powerful that I felt it in my chest like thunder. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, echoing off the cliff walls. Then silence. Every bird in the forest stopped singing. I climbed back up that rope faster than I'd ever climbed in my life. Jim assigned 2 other rangers to help with the search for Marcus, Pete Thompson and Bobby Lee. Both were good men, but they had that look in their eyes, Tao. Cat said they thought a woman shouldn't be leading a search and rescue operation. "Maybe we should call in the state police," Pete suggested as we studied the map. "This is looking like more than we can handle." "We handle mountain rescues," I said. "That's our job." Bobby snorted. "This ain't no rescue, Catherine. This is a recovery. And whatever killed those men is still out there." He was right, but I wasn't about to let them see me back down. Then we find it, and put an end to this. We started our search at dawn. The plan was to work in a grid pattern covering the wilderness area where the tracks had led. Each of us carried a radio, first aid kit, and a rifle loaded with heavy rounds that could drop a black bear. The forest felt wrong from the moment we stepped off the trail. Too quiet. No bird song, no squirrel chatter. No insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed muffled. Our radios crackled with static, and our compasses spun like pinwheels. "Equipment's going haywire," Pete reported, getting readings that don't make sense. We pressed on. Around noon, Bobby found something that made us all stop and stare. A tree, a big oak that must have been 100 years old, had been snapped in half about 10 feet up from the ground. Not broken by wind or lightning, but twisted off like someone had grabbed the top and spun it until the trunk gave way. "What the hell could do that?" Pete whispered. I walked around the tree, studying the damage. The bark showed long gouges where something had gripped it. Something with claws. "Look at this," Bobby called out. He was standing 20 yards away, pointing at another tree. This one had deep scratches running from the base to about 12 feet up. "It's marking territory." That's when we heard it. The same low roar I'd heard at the cliff, but closer, much closer. It seemed to come from all around us, vibrating through the ground and up into our bones. The sound of something big and angry and hunting. "We need to get out of here," Pete said, backing toward the trail. "Now!" But before we could move, something crashed through the trees ahead of us. I caught just a glimpse. A massive black shape moving on 2 legs between the trunks. It had to be 9 feet tall, covered in coarse, dark fur. For just a second, it turned its head toward us, and I saw yellow eyes that burned with intelligence. Then it was gone. "Did you all see that?" I asked. Neither Pete nor Bobby answered. They were both staring at the trees where the creature had vanished. "We're going back," Pete said. "Right now." But when we turned around, a huge boulder, had to weigh 200 pounds, came flying through the air and crashed into the trees just yards from where we stood. The impact shook the ground. We ran. The thing followed us for half a mile, always just out of sight but close enough that we could hear it crashing through the underbrush. It threw rocks and dead trees like they weighed nothing. Once, I looked back and saw it standing on its hind legs on a ridge above us, silhouetted against the sky like some nightmare from an old story. We made it back to the parking area, gasping and shaking. Pete's hands trembled so bad he couldn't work his radio. "What do we tell Jim?" Bobby asked. "The truth," I said. Pete laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "The truth? You want to tell him we got chased out of the woods by Bigfoot? I want to tell him we found evidence of a large, aggressive animal that poses a danger to hikers and climbers." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those yellow eyes and the intelligence I'd seen in them. This wasn't just some animal defending its territory, it was hunting, and it was smart. The next morning, we found Pete. Pete Thompson's body was discovered by a hiker about a mile from where we'd encountered the creature. He'd been crushed under a rock fall, except the rocks had been arranged, not fallen. Someone or something had deliberately piled them on top of him. Jim finally called in the state police, but I could see in his eyes that he was starting to believe. Too many impossible things were happening for coincidence. "I want this area cleared of all civilians," I told the state trooper in charge. "No hikers, no climbers, no hunters, nothing." "On what authority?" he asked. "On the authority that I'm the ranger who knows these mountains better than anyone, and something up there is killing people." While the police set up roadblocks, I drove to the Cherokee Reservation to talk to Thomas Crowfeather, an elder I'd met at community meetings. If there were old stories about these mountains, he'd know them. Thomas listened without interruption as I described what we'd seen. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Nun yu nu we," he said. "The stone giant. The Cherokee have stories about such creatures, but we hoped they were only memories." "What do the stories say?" "That some giants were good, helped the people, but others were hungry, angry. They made war on humans until the thunder beings drove them into the deep places under the mountains." "Under the mountains?" Thomas studied my face. "There are old mines in that area, places where the earth was wounded by digging. Sometimes wounding the earth wakes things that should stay sleeping." I knew about the old mines. Back in the 1920s, there'd been a mining operation that tried to dig copper out of the mountain. The whole thing collapsed in 1924, trapping 17 men inside. They never recovered the bodies. That night, against Jim's direct orders, I went back into the mountains alone. I had to know what we were dealing with. I found the old mine entrance around midnight. It was hidden in a narrow valley covered by 60 years of vines and fallen trees. But something had been clearing the brush away recently. The opening was maybe 6 feet wide and tall enough for a man to walk through if he ducked. Fresh scratches on the rocks around the entrance, scratch marks that matched what I'd seen on the dead climbers. I had my flashlight and my rifle, but standing there in the dark, I felt like a child with a slingshot facing down a dragon. Still, I had to look inside. The tunnel went back about 50 feet before ending in a cave-in. The air was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of decay. My light picked out old mining equipment, rusted pickaxes, rotting timber supports, a wooden cart with broken wheels, and bones. Human bones scattered across the tunnel floor. That's when I heard movement behind me. I spun around, rifle ready, just as something massive filled the tunnel entrance. The creature from the forest, but now I could see it clearly in my flashlight beam. It was like a bear, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too tall, too broad, walking upright like a man. Its fur was black and matted. Its claws were longer than kitchen knives, and its eyes glowed yellow in the light. But worst of all was the intelligence in those eyes. This thing was thinking, planning, deciding whether to kill me quickly or slowly. "Easy," I whispered, backing deeper into the tunnel. "Easy there." The creature tilted its massive head and made a sound. Not quite a growl, not quite speech, but something that might have been words in a language older than memory. Then it charged. I emptied my rifle into its chest. All 6 rounds, dead center. The bullets barely slowed it down. It swatted my rifle away like it was a toy and grabbed me by the shoulders. Its claws punched through my jacket and into my flesh. I thought I was dead, but instead of tearing me apart, it lifted me up and looked into my face. Its breath was hot and rank, smelling of old meat and deep earth. For a moment that lasted forever, we stared at each other. Then it spoke. "Mine," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "Mine." It threw me against the tunnel wall hard enough to crack ribs. I hit the ground, gasping, tasting blood. The creature turned and walked deeper into the mine, towards Saw It, the cave-in where the 17 miners had died 50 years ago. I crawled out of that tunnel and ran for my truck. I made it back to town somehow, though I don't remember much of the drive. Jim took one look at me, torn jacket, bleeding shoulders, eyes wide with shock, and called an ambulance. At the hospital, I tried to explain what had happened. The doctors treated my wounds and suggested I might have suffered a concussion. The state police took my statement with polite skepticism. Everyone wanted to believe I'd been attacked by a regular bear and that trauma had made me imagine the rest. But Jim Walsh believed me. Maybe because he'd grown up hearing the old stories, or maybe because he'd seen enough impossible things in 40 years of mountain work. Whatever the reason, he backed my recommendation to permanently close the area around Rough Ridge. Geological instability, he wrote in the official report. Danger of rock slides makes the area unsafe for recreational use. The state police found the old mine entrance and sealed it with concrete and steel bars. The official story was that unstable mining tunnels posed a hazard to hikers. They put up warning signs and fencing, then declared the whole valley off-limits. I got a commendation for my work on the case and a promotion to district supervisor, but they transferred me to Shenandoah, 4 hours away from the Blue Ridge. Fresh start, they said. New challenges. The truth was I couldn't handle being a ranger anymore. Every time I looked at a cliff face, I saw Tom's torn body. Every time I heard the wind in the trees, I remembered that voice saying mine. I developed a fear of heights that ended my climbing career and made search and rescue work impossible. I resigned from the Park Service 6 months later and became a teacher. Safer work, I figured. No mountains, no mysteries, no monsters. But before I left, I wrote a detailed report of everything that had happened. I sealed it in a file cabinet in my office with instructions that it should be given to whoever took over my territory, just in case. Because the thing is, the seismic monitors we installed around the old mine still pick up regular vibrations. Small earthquakes that happen like clockwork, every few weeks, always in the same spot. The scientists say it's just the mountain settling, but I know better. Something down there is still moving, still waiting. And sometimes, late at night when I'm grading papers in my quiet house 300 miles away, I wake up from dreams of yellow eyes and dark tunnels. In those dreams, I can still hear that voice echoing off stone walls. Mine, mine, mine. The beast of Blue Ridge is still out there, guarding its territory, protecting whatever sleeps in the deep places under the mountain. The barriers we built won't hold it forever. Nothing made by human hands could. I just pray that when it decides to come out again, I'll be too far away to hear it roar. My name is Catherine Ironwood, and that's what really happened on Grandfather Mountain in October of 1973. I'm telling you this story because you have a right to know. Because someday, someone else might see those yellow eyes in the dark and wonder if they're going crazy. They're not. The mountains keep their secrets, but sometimes those secrets keep us too.